Chapter 596. Change. Chapter 596. Change. Dragon Burial Valley. Ji Yaoxue and Perfected Lord Mingzhe stood at the edge and had nowhere to retreat. Perfected Lord Mingzhe had a grim expression. The two nascent souls that stood in midair had frightening auras and sharp gazes. They were cultivators of heavenly piercing sword sect. The man on the left with a long face was Xueqi, and he specialized in using dual swords. The skinny old man on the right was Perfected Lord Tian Chen. He cultivated a supreme sword technique that even dust couldn't penetrate once it was released. Both of them were experts of the North region who were way more famous than he was. If it was a one-on-one fight, Perfected Lord Mingzhe was confident that he could maneuver his way through. However, if the two of them struck at the same time, he would definitely be defeated. Behind Si Junyu, there were another 20 golden cores. Apart from the top guards of the Great Xia dynasty, there were 10 golden core sword cultivators from Heavenly Piercing Sword Sect who were all at late stage or perfected golden core realm. Any few people from the 20 was enough to suppress Ji Yaoxue. It was clear that the other party had planned this for a long time and came prepared, not intending to give them any chance. Perfected Lord Mingzhe frowned tightly and was anxious internally. Given the circumstances, it was already difficult for him to protect himself, let alone escort Ji Yaoxue out of this place. In the cultivation world, sword cultivators had the greatest killing power. Nobody could guarantee that they would be able to escape unscathed against the attacks of two great sword cultivators. Ji Yaoxue had a calm expression and glared at Si Junyu coldly. There were no signs of weakness or fear in her eyes. Piak, piak, piak. Si Junyu clapped and raised his chin, smiling. It's no wonder why you're the empress of a dynasty. To think that you can still maintain your composure even at this moment. I hope that you can remain as calm when you end up in my hands later on. Fufu, I can't wait to get my hands all over you. Clang, clang. The sound of swords unsheathing echoed. Beside Si Junyu, 5 guards and 5 cultivators of Heavenly Piercing Sword Sect moved at the same time and charged towards Ji Yaoxue. The other 10 people guarded Si Junyu. Ji Yaoxue had a cold gaze and circulated her golden core, slapping her storage bag. Swash! 2 flying swords hovered at the front before bursting through the air. My! Si Junyu yelled in fake surprise. 2 supreme-grade flying swords. Impressive! Impressive! Herg! The 5 great Xia guards were clad in armor and strode forward with cold expressions. They struck at the same time in unison with a ferocious momentum. Clang! 5 thick sabers collided heavily against the incoming flying sword. Sparks flew everywhere. The 5 sabers were only superior-grade spirit weapons. However, the 5 men had higher cultivation realms than Ji Yaoxue, and furthermore, they were trained in their combo attacks. The slashes of those 5 sabers caused one of the supreme-grade flying swords to be repelled instantly. A look of mockery flashed through one of the Heavenly Piercing Sword Sect's cultivators. He struck immediately and twisted his sword, causing sword chi to surge forward and repelled the other flying sword. The difference was too great. In a single round, she had already lost control of both her supreme-grade flying swords. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. The other 4 sword chis streaked past Ji Yaoxue. Buzz! The robe she was wearing glowed brightly with 4 spirit patterns in a bedazzling manner, withstanding the killing power of the sword chi. It was the robe that Su Zimo had crafted for her personally back then. Although it could withstand the sharpness of the swords, it could not block out their power completely. Ji Yaoxue grunted dully and her face turned paler. To be fair, if not for the fact that Si Junyu wanted to capture her alive, it would have been too easy for those sword cultivators to kill her. Si Junyu remarked leisurely, Ji Yaoxue, I'd advise you to surrender obediently and spare yourself the pain. Ji Yaoxue clenched her teeth unyieldingly and circulated her golden core wildly as she conjured a hand seal and released a secret skill of the Great Zhou dynasty. Emperor Defensive Chi. Ji Yaoxue's spirit energy surged fanatically and gathered at her fingers through specific meridians. Pointing forward gently, spirit energy surged out and formed an arrow rain of sword chi in midair that shot towards the 10 incoming golden cores. The Emperor Defensive Chi was a secret skill of the Great Qian Empire. The Great Zhou dynasty only managed to secure an incomplete section of it. Even so, The might of that secret skill was not to be underestimated, and it consumed an immense amount of spirit energy. Ji Yaoxue had just advanced to Golden Core realm and the burst of that spirit art depleted her spirit energy almost entirely. Her Golden Core was already throbbing in pain. Clang, 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 clang. Be it the great Xia guards or the sword cultivators of heavenly piercing sword sect, none of them were afraid. Their sabers and swords danced and welcomed the incoming sword chi, dispersing them entirely. Even Emperor defensive chi could not stop the advancement of 10 golden cores. Ji Yaoxue grit her teeth with a resolute gaze. The Dragon Burial Valley was right behind her. As the Empress of Great Zhou, she'd rather die than endure humiliation in the hands of Si Junyu. At the most, she would just be crushed. In midair. The outcome of the fight between perfected Lord Mingzei and the two sword cultivators was about to be shown. To be precise, it was the death of one party. Perfected Lord Mingzei had already used all his strength and released all his trump cards. Even then, he could not withstand the edge of the two sword cultivators and was wounded from head to toe as blood stained his robes. Ugh! Perfected Lord Mingzei's gaze dimmed as he sighed internally. It's over, it's over. Even after cultivating for hundreds of years, I can't complete this path. Such is the cultivation world. Seems like the Dragon Burial Valley is truly an unlucky place. Perfected Lord Mingzei smiled in self-mockery. Below him, Ji Yaoxue already had nowhere to retreat. Turning around to look at the dark and mysterious Dragon Burial Valley behind her, she had no fear nor sadness in her eyes. Instead, there was relief and ease. Zimo, did you jump from here 5 years ago? I'm coming to join you now 5 years later. Ji Yaoxue smiled and leaped down into the Dragon Burial Valley. All of a sudden, a white light flashed at an extremely fast speed and coiled around Ji Yaoxue's waist like a python. Ji Yaoxue was about to fall when she was coiled by an extremely nimble spirit rope and yanked up from the cliff directly. A great Xia guard was on the other end of the spirit rope. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. The spirit rope continued coiling and instantly restrained Ji Yaoxue's limbs. She had no way of breaking free. Si Junyu reared his head in wild laughter and remarked gleefully, "Fellow Taoist Yaoxue, I've already expected that move from you and prepared for it. There's no way you're going to have such an easy death." Ji Yaoxue's face turned pale. She was not afraid of death. Rather, she was afraid of the humiliation she would face from Si Junyu. At that time, the entire Great Zhou dynasty would become a joke. "Bring that woman over here." Si Junyu laughed with a sharp glint in his eyes. "I want to see how the Empress of Great Zhou is going to perform when she's kneeling in front of me." Ha ha ha. Understood. A guard strode forward and reached out to whisk Ji Yaoxue up. All of a sudden, a change happened. On the other end of the battlefield, a gray figure charged over at an extremely fast speed. He arrived before them instantly with a torrential killing intent. Nobody saw where that man came from. It was as though he appeared from thin air. "You!" One of the heavenly piercing sword sect cultivators was alarmed and was about to speak. However, he was knocked flying before he could even lift his sword. Exploding in midair, the person turned into a mist of blood and died on the spot. A sword cultivator was rammed to death just like that. Chapter 597. Massacre. Chapter 597. Massacre. The speed of the intruder was way too fast. Everyone merely felt their visions blur before that person charged into the crowd and rammed a sword cultivator to death before arriving before Ji Yaoxue. In fact, nobody could even tell the gender of the intruder, let alone make out his appearance. "Who's there?" The great Xia guard beside Ji Yaoxue hollered and circulated his golden core. Releasing his spirit energy, he slashed in reverse towards the intruder's head. Bang! The intruder did not avoid or dodge at all. At an extremely fast speed, before the saber even reached his head, he struck first and punched the great Xia guard in the chest. The great Xia guard's body was smashed into pieces. Another golden core was dead. Pest! Everyone was shocked and gasped, retreating a step back instinctively. The intruder killed 2 people in succession and stopped right beside Ji Yaoxue. He lowered his body and reached out to tug at the spirit rope that was binding the latter. Pang, pang, pang. The spirit rope snapped into pieces. By now, the cold and steely Great Xia guards could no longer stay calm as well. Although that spirit rope looked unassuming, even perfected golden cores would struggle to break free from it once they were entangled, let alone snap it. What sort of strength was that? Finally, everyone caught a clear view of the intruder's appearance. Monk. The intruder was a middle-aged monk wearing gray robes that were pale from washing. He looked muscular and had steely features. The strangest thing was that there was no spirit energy fluctuation emanating from the person. Even the nascent souls could not see through the person with their spirit consciousnesses, let alone the guards. It was as though the middle-aged monk was shrouded by an invisible barrier that could avoid detection from spirit consciousnesses. Initially, perfected Lord Mingzhe was delighted when he saw someone step in to help. After taking a clear look at that person, disappointment filled his eyes. Although he could not see through the middle-aged monk, he could sense that there was no dermic power from that person. In other words, this middle-aged monk was a golden core at most. Given the current circumstances, even if the person who arrived was the number 1 golden core, it would not change anything. That was because there were still 2 sword cultivators of nascent soul realm. That was the most frightening power that could not be ignored. Gu Xueqi and perfected Lord Tianchen had clearly also deduced the cultivation realm of the middle-aged monk relying on their experience. Perfected Lord Tianchen sneered, "Humph, a puny golden core who doesn't know what's good for him." When he heard that, Si Junyu heaved a sigh of relief and calmed down. As long as the person who arrived was only at golden core, there wouldn't be any accidents. Everyone's gaze turned towards the middle-aged monk. It was the same for Ji Yaoxue. She looked at that foreign face with a lost expression. She did not know this person at all. Yet, why would he risk his life to save her? My gratitude, fellow Taoist. Despite her confusion, Ji Yaoxue expressed her thanks. The middle-aged monk nodded expressionlessly. Ji Yaoxue frowned with an odd feeling in her heart. It was indescribable. Where did this wild monk spout out from? How dare you interfere in the affairs of the great Xia dynasty? Si Junyu hollered and interrupted Ji Yaoxue's train of thoughts. The middle-aged monk turned around and swept his gaze across the 3 nascent souls that were fighting in midair dully. When he looked at Si Junyu, who was not far away, his eyes turned murderous and he stomped forward. Boom! The ground quaked. All the golden cores present felt their hearts skip a beat. The middle-aged monk had already disappeared from where he was. Like an ancient ferocious beast, he charged forward with a terrifying might. Everywhere he passed, the ground overturned and mud flew, creating a massive ravine. He was way too savage. His ferocity was suffocating. A great Xia guard reacted slower, and by the time he raised the saber on his back, the middle-aged monk's palm had already descended. Poof! That person's head was shoved right into his chest and his neck snapped. He died on the spot. Another great Xia guard's saber descended. The monk did not even bother to look at all and punched against the saber with his bare fist. Die! The great Xia guard hollered with a cruel expression. Snap! There wasn't the sound of a blade cutting into flesh that he expected to hear. There wasn't a flash of blood that he expected to see either. Everyone could clearly tell that the superior-grade saber that was crafted from pure gold crystal was shattered by the middle-aged monk's bare hands. Poof! Countless shards scattered and riddled the great Xia guard's body with holes that flowed with blood. That person fell stiffly with widened eyes. Where did this demonic monk come from? From the side, a heavenly piercing sword sect cultivator circulated spirit energy and his sword quivered and buzzed. It emitted 5 spirit lights that was extremely domineering and chilling. It was a perfect grade spirit weapon. Swash! The person's sword trembled. Instantly, 13 sword phantoms appeared in midair. The phantoms danced wildly and it was difficult to distinguish between reality and illusion. The middle-aged monk's gaze shimmered and he reached out, identifying the true body of the sword instantly. Not only that, his fingers seemed like they were metal and forceful, dodging the sharpness of the blade nimbly as they pinned the sword on its blade. All the sword phantoms dispersed. Nothing remained. The sword cultivator's expression changed and he wanted to withdraw his sword by instinct. However, after it was pinned by the middle-aged monk's fingers, the perfect grade sword seemed like it was pinned under a mountain and could not budge at all. Not good. The person sensed danger and realized that something was amiss. He wanted to retreat, but it was too late. The middle-aged monk shifted agilely and pushed the blade that he was holding gently forward. The entire process was fluid as water without any pauses at all. The blade swiped past the person's throat. It was extremely simple, but it was enough to take the person's life. Shing! A blood mist spewed out. The sword cultivator clutched at the wound on his throat frantically, but he could not stop the blood flow as his gaze dimmed swiftly. Another 3 golden cores were dead. The entire process seemed very slow upon narration, but in fact, it occurred in the split of a moment. The middle-aged monk did not pause at all, and in the blink of an eye, he had already arrived before Si Junyu, leaving 5 golden cores in his wake. Si Junyu was panicked. He had never seen such methods before. His guards, and even the sword cultivators of Heavenly Piercing Sword Sect, could not even withstand a single move against the middle-aged monk, as though they were pieces of paper in his path. The middle-aged monk was ruthless and every single attack from him was a killing blow. He gave no chances at all. Kill him for me! Si Junyu howled. There were 5 more great Xia guards and 5 sword cultivators from Heavenly Piercing Sword Sect in front of him. To Si Junyu, as long as the 10 golden cores could hold back the middle-aged monk, the latter would definitely die once the 2 nascent souls in the air killed perfected Lord Mingzei and returned. Kill! The 5 great Xia guards roared and struck at the same time. Boom! The eyes of one of Heavenly Piercing Sword Sect's sword cultivators lit up and he produced an extremely frightening aura. Without even testing the waters, he released his golden core phenomenon. Chapter 598. Terrifying Combat Strength. Chapter 598. Terrifying Combat Strength. Heavenly Piercing 7 Swords. The man hollered and the sword chi within his body rumbled. His golden core circulated wildly as spirit energy howled. 7 gigantic swords appeared hovering in the air behind him, so sharp that they threatened to rip the heavens into pieces. Heavenly Piercing 7 Swords. Rank 78 of the previous phenomenon ranking. This sword cultivator had clearly gained the true legacy of Heavenly Piercing Sword Sect. Furthermore, he must have had an extremely deep level of comprehension to be able to cultivate this golden core phenomenon of the sect. Golden core phenomenons were the most terrifying attacks of golden cores. The golden core phenomenons of sword cultivators were even more lethal. The middle-aged monk had just advanced when the 5 great Xia guards released a combo technique in unison with a tacit understanding. Their 5 sabers seemed to fuse together into a sturdy and massive saber that descended from the skies with an apocalyptic aura. Additionally, 4 swords that shimmered with a chilling light shot over from 4 different angles. Before they arrived, the swords were already letting off an unsettling aura. The most terrifying attack was the golden core phenomenon that was just released. Heavenly Piercing 7 Swords. Kill him! Kill him! Si Junyu howled with a maniacal look. The middle-aged monk was expressionless against the incoming attacks. His eyes lit up as he opened his mouth, releasing a deafening sound of Sanskrit. OM! That syllable was extremely odd and was definitely not a normal word from Tianhuang mainland. It possessed a noble might when it was spoken by the middle-aged monk. Even though there was no spirit energy fluctuation from the body of the middle-aged monk, the Sanskrit reverberated through the world continuously as though it could tunnel through any obstacles straight into one's heart. That Sanskrit was a burst that relied merely on the power of his organs, throat and tongue. Sound secret skill. The 3 nascent souls in midair were slightly surprised. Sound secret skills were the rarest secret techniques in the cultivation world and were extremely difficult to cultivate. Only certain super sects and top factions have them. That daming mantra was a renowned secret skill of the daming monastery that had been lost for 10,000 years. The lifespans of nascent souls were merely a few thousand years old. Naturally, none of the 3 nascent souls knew of the origin of that secret skill. On the battlefield, the 10 golden cores that were fighting were caught unprepared and shuddered. The 5 sabers of the great Xia guards and 4 swords of the sword cultivators paused briefly as well. For ordinary cultivators, that delay might not have seemed like anything much. However, in the eyes of the middle-aged monk, it was a massive opening. A single delay meant that there was a break in their strength. The middle-aged monk did not dodge or avoid. Instead, he took the first move and swung his arm like a thick iron whip against the 5 sabers. Crack, crack, crack. All the sabers shattered. The 5 great Xia guards were shocked. Right as they were about to retreat, they discovered that the middle-aged monk did not continue to chase them. He had turned towards the 4 sword cultivators from Heavenly Piercing Sword Sect. Before the 5 of them could react, another sound of Sanskrit boomed in their ears. It was truly an explosion. It was as though thunder had just sounded in their ears. Ma! All 5 of them widened their eyes, which instantly turned bloodshot as they froze on the spot. It was as though a gigantic hammer had thumped them at the back of the head, causing them to lose consciousness for a moment. The 4 sword cultivators of Heavenly Piercing Sword Sect had initially recovered and were about to continue attacking when they heard the second Sanskrit word. All 4 of them revealed pained expressions and winced badly. They could not even maintain their grip on the swords in their hands, let alone continue to attack. The middle-aged monk charged into the 4 of them with a cold gaze. Instantly, he threw out 4 punches in succession and ruptured all of their heads. In the end, the remaining sword cultivator could not manage to attack as well. It wasn't because he didn't want to, it was because he couldn't. The 2 Sanskrit words caused him to freeze up, and the 7 swords behind him swayed before they even materialized fully, showing signs of dispersing. How could that person attack to deal with the middle-aged monk when he could not even defend? Within a split second, 4 of his fellow sect mates were dead. And at that very moment, the middle-aged monk had already arrived before him. The next moment, his pupils constricted violently. He could see the middle-aged monk opening his mouth once more. Ni! The 3rd Sanskrit word had descended. The first people affected were the 5 great Xia guards that were rooted on the spot. Grisly fresh blood was already streaming down their eyes, ears, mouth and nose due to the blow from the 3 consecutive Sanskrit sounds. They were bleeding from all orifices. It seemed like the 5 of them did not have any injuries on their bodies. However, their brains were already smashed from the vibrations. All 5 of them fell stiffly with dim gazes. The middle-aged monk had not laid his hands on them up till the very end. They were shocked to death by the 3 Sanskrit sounds. As for the remaining sword cultivator, his face was pale as a sheet and his eyes were filled with fear. His golden core phenomenon was already trembling against the impact of the 3 Sanskrit sounds and could disperse at any moment. He had cultivated for more than 200 years, been through endless battles and could also be considered as a genius of Heavenly Piercing Sword Sect. However, he had never seen anyone fight in such a manner. There was no spirit energy in the other person's body. Yet, his power of phenomenon was shaken just by the other person's voice. In other words, if not for the protection of his golden core phenomenon, he would have been seriously injured against the impact of the 3 Sanskrit sounds even if he wasn't dead. The next moment, the middle-aged monk closed in and opened his mouth once again. Pa! The 4th Sanskrit sound. The instant the 4th Sanskrit sound descended, the middle-aged monk suddenly struck as well and punched the golden core phenomenon directly. Snap! All 7 swords were completely snapped. The remaining golden cores felt grimaced at the sight of that in shock. None of them had ever witnessed such power before. Golden core phenomenons were the strongest methods available for golden cores. Even top-tier spirit arts might not be able to go against them. But now, everyone was witnessing someone go against a golden core phenomenon head-on with his body alone. The scariest thing was that Heavenly Piercing Sword Sect's Heavenly Piercing 7 swords could not even withstand a single blow from the person's Sanskrit sounds and punch. Poof! The golden core phenomenon shattered and the last sword cultivator shuddered, coughing up a huge mouthful of blood. The middle-aged monk did not give him any chance at all and strode forward, tapping him on the throat gently with a finger. Snap! The person's throat snapped and he died on the spot. Si Junyu was completely scared out of his wits. He had truly not expected that 10 golden cores, including an expert who cultivated a golden core phenomenon, could not stop the middle-aged monk for a single second. The entire process sounded long upon narration, but in fact, it only took 3 breaths. Before Si Junyu could react, the middle-aged monk had already arrived before him. At that moment, it was too late even if the two nascent souls, Xueqi and Tianchen, wanted to step in and help. How dare you! Perfected Lord Tianchen could not help but holler loudly when he saw that. Monk, if you dare to kill him, you will definitely die today. Xueqi said coldly. Chapter 599. What is he doing? Chapter 599. What is he doing? Instantly, Si Junyu was scared out of his wits. Ah! Si Junyu withdrew a cold shimmering sword from his storage bag and his spirit energy surged wildly as he stabbed at the middle-aged monk's head. At the same time, Si Junyu crushed a protection talisman in his left hand. Whoosh! A golden burst of light glowed around Si Junyu and formed an impenetrable barrier. The middle-aged monk did not dodge or avoid the incoming sword and flicked his finger casually. His fingertip met the sword's blade. Clang! Si Junyu's sword was snapped by the middle-aged monk's finger in a single strike. With a ripped palm, Si Junyu could no longer hold on to his sword and let go. Thereafter, his vision blurred and the middle-aged monk was already gone from his sights. For everyone else, they saw the middle-aged monk take a step after snapping Si Junyu's blade to wrap behind the latter. The middle-aged monk's movements were way too fluid. It was like water. There was no delay between his movements ever since he first attacked. The middle-aged monk's entire body coiled around Si Junyu's golden barrier like an anaconda and exerted strength massively. Crack, crack, crack. A series of cracks appeared on the golden barrier. After a brief pause, the golden barrier shattered entirely. The middle-aged monk reached out and grabbed Si Junyu's neck, exerting strength in his fingers. Si Junyu merely felt his body and limbs go limp. He could not move at all and could only let the middle-aged monk lift him up. Everyone stop! The middle-aged monk turned around and said coldly. The two great Xia guards and 3 heavenly piercing sword-sex sword cultivators that were chasing after him stopped hurriedly with a deep look of fear in their eyes. This middle-aged monk was way too brutal. Ever since he started attacking, any golden core who stood in his path died. Nobody was spared. Rather than a benevolent monk, he was more like a demon with a murderous nature. In the blink of an eye, Si Junyu wound up in the hands of the middle-aged monk and Xueqi and Perfected Lord Tianchen could not help but stop their attacks on Perfected Lord Mingzai. With a relieved expression, Perfected Lord Mingzai fell from midair in exhaustion. Fortunately, Ji Yaoxue rushed forward and supported him. Instantly, the situation became special. On the side of the Great Xia dynasty, there were 5 golden cores and 2 nascent souls with frightening strength remaining. On the side of the Great Zhou dynasty, Ji Yaoxue's spirit energy was already drained after releasing Emperor Defensive Qi and did not have much combat strength left. As for Perfected Lord Mingzai, he was filled with injuries all over and could not fight any longer. On the surface, it seemed like the Great Zhou dynasty was completely disadvantaged. However, the issue now was that Si Junyu had fallen in the hands of the middle-aged monk. Suddenly, Perfected Lord Mingzai and everyone else understood the middle-aged monk's intentions. In a head-on confrontation, he was definitely not a match for the 2 nascent soul sword cultivators. The only way to break out of the situation and survive was to use all his might to capture Si Junyu alive, thereby gaining the upper hand. What an impressive monk! Perfected Lord Mingzai thought to himself. The fact that this middle-aged monk was able to discover the method of breaking out of the situation within such a short period of time was proof of his understanding of the circumstances and the sharpness of his mind. In reality, even at that moment, Perfected Lord Mingzai had yet to realize the middle-aged monk's true intentions. By the time he realized, what he felt was not just shock, it was fear. It was an act that required an extreme amount of guts. Ji Yaoxue supported Perfected Lord Mingzai and gazed at the middle-aged monk not far away with a slightly raised brow. For some reason, she felt that there was something odd about this. If that middle-aged monk was only at Golden Core Realm and they did not know one another, why would he want to undertake such a huge risk just to save her? Saving her was one thing, but the way he murdered them so decisively seemed like he was doing it out of rage. She was the target of Si Junyu and the others. If so, where did the rage of the middle-aged monk stem from? Could there be a deep feud between this man and the Great Xia dynasty, and he merely attacked after bumping into them by coincidence. Ji Yaoxue could not figure it out. Gu Xueqi and Perfected Lord Tianchen glared at the middle-aged monk coldly from midair, as though they wanted to make out something from the middle-aged monk's face. He was expressionless without any fear in his eyes. Gu Xueqi narrowed his eyes and said coolly, "The Buddhist sects believe that the Bodhisattva is compassionate for living beings. Monk, you are way too murderous for someone of the Buddhist sects. The Buddhist sects also believe that the Vajra's rage is required to subdue evil." The middle-aged monk's gaze blazed, and he was truly like a descended Vajra that was unavoidable. Humph! Perfected Lord Tianchen scoffed with a chilling killing intent. "Monk, if you dare lay harm on him, I'll tear you into pieces and burn your bones into ashes." The middle-aged monk was unmoved by the nascent soul's threat, and even exerted more strength in his fingers. Si Junyu's expression turned purplish, but he could not say a single word at all. Suddenly, Gu Xueqi's gaze flashed and he asked, "Nothing will come out of this stalemate anyways. How about we strike a deal?" "Oh." The middle-aged monk raised his brows slightly. Gu Xueqi said darkly, "If you let him off, we'll leave right away." The middle-aged monk pondered for a moment before asking, "How do I know you won't renege on your word?" Perfected Lord Tianchen and Gu Xueqi exchanged glances, and their eyes flashed with a sly intent as they gained a tacit understanding. "Both of us are nascent souls and we value our reputation. There's no way we will go back on anything we say." When he heard that, Perfected Lord Mingzai's heart skipped a beat. In the cruel cultivation world, nobody's promise could be taken at face value unless they were from completely trusted people. Furthermore, even if the two of them reneged on their words and killed them, word of this would never spread and there would naturally be no impact on their reputations as well. Initially, Perfected Lord Mingzai thought that the middle-aged monk would be able to see through the dangers given his intellect. However, he did not expect the middle-aged monk to be moved. "For real?" The middle-aged monk raised his brows slightly before asking the two nascent souls once more. "Our word is gold." Gu Xueqi repressed the joy in his heart and replied with conviction without letting anything slip. In his opinion, even though this middle-aged monk may be strong and sharp, he might have way too little experience in the cultivation world after chanting sutras in seclusion for the most part of his life. As long as they saved Si Junyu, this middle-aged monk would definitely be dead. "Don't!" Perfected Lord Mingzai was flustered. Right as he was about to speak, the middle-aged monk nodded. "All right, I'll trust you guys." With that said, he lifted Si Junyu and walked towards the two nascent souls. Instantly, Perfected Lord Mingzai was devastated. He had already noticed that Gu Xueqi and Perfected Lord Tianchen could barely contain their delight and killing intents in the depths of their eyes. Their gazes were burning, as though their bloodied mouths were already wide open, waiting for this gullible and ignorant monk to deliver himself to them. Suddenly, a thought struck Ji Yaoxue and she whispered, "If he wants to release the hostage, why does he have to walk towards the two nascent souls?" Perfected Lord Mingzai was stunned. That's right. He could just release the hostage instantly. Why walk over towards the two nascent souls? What is he trying to do? Perfected Lord Mingzai's eyes flashed with confusion. Could it be? Chapter 600. Killing Nascent Souls. Chapter 600. Killing Nascent Souls. The middle-aged monk lifted Si Junyu and advanced closer towards Gu Xueqi and Perfected Lord Tianchen. In the blink of an eye, they were less than 10 feet away. Compared to the joyful gazes of Gu Xueqi and Perfected Lord Tianchen, the middle-aged monk seemed calm and his eyes were deep and emotionless. When he arrived, the middle-aged monk tossed Si Junyu towards Perfected Lord Tianchen in a seemingly casual manner. Perfected Lord Tianchen's eyes lit up as he reached out to receive. On the other side, Gu Xueqi burst out in laughter. Ha ha! All of a sudden, Gu Xueqi's laughter came to a stop. From the corner of his eyes, he spotted a figure dart over from behind Si Junyu to charge over. His eyes shone with a ferocious glint like an ancient demon that was about to devour humans. Pest! Gu Xueqi gasped. That middle-aged monk actually harbored killing intents towards a nascent soul. How could he? How could a golden core dare lay his hands on a nascent soul? Die! The middle-aged monk roared with a thunder-like voice and let off an asphyxiating killing intent. He reached out with his muscular palm that blanketed the skies and stirred the clouds. Xueqi merely felt his vision darken with a massive shadow above his head, as though dark clouds were covering him. You have a death wish. Gripping his sword in reverse, Xueqi slashed across fiercely. The two of them were way too close. Before the sword technique was fully released, Su Zimo had already gripped Xueqi first with his left hand. At this point, it did not matter any longer how amazing the sword technique was. At this distance, melee combat strength and the power of one's body was what mattered. Xueqi's expression changed starkly, and there was finally a hint of panic in his eyes. His wrist was locked by the middle-aged monk and he could not break free at all. At that moment, he had finally realized how frightening the physique of the middle-aged monk was. The middle-aged monk's melee combat strength was enough to threaten his life. Xueqi was a nascent soul. In a normal exchange, he could utilize dermic power with his spirit consciousness and would not allow the middle-aged monk a chance to get close. Now that he was closed in by the middle-aged monk, it was akin to him being closed in by a pure-blooded ferocious beast. Any single misstep would cause him to die on the spot. Most cultivators were weak physically and could not compare to demons at all. That was the reason why cultivators would always make use of means such as spirit arts, dermic arts and spirit weapons to keep their distance and not allow demon beasts to close it. They would be in danger once they were closed in by the demon beasts. Perfected Lord Tianchen had just caught Si Junyu, who was tossed over and could not help at all. At that moment, Xueqi could only rely on himself. The precision of the middle-aged monk's attacks was way too perfect. This was a situation that could not have happened if he was faster or slower by a single second. Snap! The middle-aged monk did not give Xueqi any time to react and snapped his wrist instantly. Ah! Xueqi howled in pain and was drenched in cold sweat. Swoosh! At the same time, the middle-aged monk's heavenly encompassing palm descended with an intimidating aura. Xueqi's wrist was snapped and he was momentarily stunned. By the time he returned to his senses, the middle-aged monk's palm was already descending from above his head. In his hurry, he could only raise his arms to block. Crack, crack, crack. That short collision caused Xueqi's arm to be snapped instantly against the pressure of the middle-aged monk's palm. The palm continued descending and landed fiercely on top of Xueqi's head. Bang! Brain juice was splattered. Xueqi's eyes widened and his face was torn apart like a spiderweb. His head was ruptured by a single slap from the middle-aged monk. This essence spirit dispersed and he could not have been more dead. A nascent soul was dead. Even Xueqi, who was right smack in the battle, could not react to it, let alone everyone else who was watching in shock. Be it Ji Yaoxue or Si Junyu's faction, neither side expected such a change in the battlefield where a nascent soul was dead in less than a second. The most frightening thing was that the massacre was not over. Demon monk, how dare you! Perfected Lord Tianchen had just placed Si Junyu down when he caught sight of that. Instantly, he was triggered and enraged. Why wouldn't I dare to? The middle-aged monk did not pause in his movements at all after killing Xueqi. With a single stride, he had already arrived before Perfected Lord Tianchen, yelling, "You're the one that's going to die." Perfected Lord Mingzhe shuddered at that statement. In other words, what the middle-aged monk meant was that he had already planned on killing the two nascent souls right from the beginning. The reason why the monk held Si Junyu hostage was not because he needed a chip in negotiation. He had already planned for this moment when he captured Si Junyu alive. Right from the beginning, he had not intended to let the two nascent souls off at all. This man truly had tremendous guts. On the battlefield, Perfected Lord Tianchen twisted his sword and aimed it at the middle-aged monk's heart, thrusting fiercely as he barked, "You don't know your limits." The sword beam was cold and sharp, as if it could destroy everything. That was a dermic weapon of nascent souls. Although the middle-aged monk had a strong body and could repel a superior-grade spirit weapon with his finger, he could not defend against the edge of a dermic weapon. Against the sharpness of the sword cultivator, he could only retreat. However, if he retreated and increased the distance between him and the nascent soul, there was no way he would be able to kill the latter. A look of conviction flashed through the middle-aged monk's eyes as he said with Sanskrit. The voids trembled. Instantly, perfected Lord Tianchen's sword paused for a brief moment. However, it was a moment so brief and undetectable that it seemed as though there was no impact at all. The middle-aged monk did not decrease his speed and merely slanted sideways while continuing to lunge towards perfected Lord Tianchen. Although the sword that was initially aimed for the middle-aged monk's heart shifted slightly, it still pierced right into his chest. Flashes of blood appeared. The middle-aged monk was indifferent and allowed the sword to pass through him as he continued charging with a ferocious glint. Perfected Lord Mingzai and everyone else could clearly see a bloodied sword burst forth from the back of the middle-aged monk. That sword did not manage to puncture the middle-aged monk's heart. However, the sharpness of the sword was less than an inch away from the heart. As long as perfected Lord Tianchen twisted his sword, he would be able to slice the middle-aged monk's heart with his blade's sharpness. Right then, the middle-aged monk arrived before perfected Lord Tianchen with the sword piercing through him and swung his arm right away. Although that arm looked like it was flexible and limp on the surface, like the trunk of an ancient divine elephant, it let out a crisp sound in midair and slapped perfected Lord Tianchen's head with a violent might. Crack, crack, crack. Perfected Lord Tianchen's head spun a few circles around his neck before coming to a stop with bulged eyes. He had stopped breathing a long time ago. Victory was decided. Death was decided. Perfected Lord Tianchen's neck had snapped long ago against that power. His brains had already been shaken into sludge and his essence spirit was destroyed. Up till his death, he gripped his sword's handle tightly. However, he was still that bit slower and did not manage to cut the middle-aged monk's heart. That was melee combat. A single lag, even if it was only for a brief instant, would mean life and death. That was the moment where life and death was decided. Perfected Lord Mingzai could not imagine how the middle-aged monk who was right smack in the battle felt earlier on. He had already broken out in cold sweat just by watching from the sidelines. That was truly gambling with one's life. As long as perfected Lord Tianchen was a step faster, the one laying dead on the ground would have been the middle-aged monk. However, at that thought, that choice and decisiveness was probably the only thing that could have killed perfected Lord Tianchen. What a scary monk. Just who in the world is he? More than shock, what perfected Lord Mingzai felt when he looked at the middle-aged monk's back view was fear. Chapter 601, Meeting. Chapter 601, Meeting. The middle-aged monk was not an outsider. He was Su Zimo after changing his appearance. At that moment, he could not appear with his true self. If anyone knew that he was not dead and had even stepped in to save the Empress of Great Zhou, the Great Zhou dynasty would definitely be in peril. The old temple at the bottom of Dragon Burial Valley would not be hidden for much longer either. Furthermore, in the depths of Su Zimo's heart, he did not dare to face Ji Yaoxue. That feeling had turned increasingly so after 5 years. It was an indescribable feeling that was conflicted. In the past 5 years, Su Zimo was isolated from the outside world in the old temple at the bottom of the Dragon Burial Valley. Away from secular affairs, there was no killing or fighting as he spent his days chanting sutras and paying respects to Buddha with a peaceful heart. However, he felt nervous the moment he heard Ji Yaoxue in danger. His peace for the past 5 years was broken instantly, and he found himself surging with an uncontrollable killing intent. Therefore, right from the moment he appeared, he had no intention of letting anyone off alive and had a decisive killing intent. Even perfected Lord Mingzai felt fear because of him. The entire process of him killing 2 great nascent souls took less than 3 breaths. Although it seemed like it was momentary and simple, he was the only one who knew best about the dangers involved. He was truly fighting with his life. A single mistake would cause him to die on the spot. In terms of actual strength, Su Zimo was definitely not a match for the nascent souls. The only thing he had stronger than Xueqi and Tianchen was his body. Dai Yu once said that demonic cultivators have the easiest time killing opponents above their levels. As long as he could engage in melee combat, he had a shot at victory. The reason why he agreed to let Si Junyu off was so that he could numb Xueqi and Tianchen, lowering their guards. The reason why the 2 nascent souls were unguarded wasn't because they lacked experience. They truly hadn't expected that a golden core would attempt to kill nascent souls. That was equivalent to a mortal plotting to kill an immortal. Su Zimo gripped the sword's handle and pulled the blade out slowly from his chest. The sharp blade ground against his bones and flesh with a jarring noise. Su Zimo was expressionless. A stream of blood spewed out. As though he had no sense of pain, Su Zimo did not even bother to look as he flung his arm behind him. Poof! A sword cultivator of heavenly piercing sword sect was stabbed through the heart and died on the spot. The remaining 4 people finally broke out of their stupor and were scared out of their wits. They exclaimed and scurried into the distance without turning back. Clutching his chest with his left hand, Su Zimo had a cold gaze and stomped on his feet. The ground quaked and he bolted forward like an arrow. It was too fast. Bang! A great Xia guard had barely run a few steps before Su Zimo caught up to him. He was slapped to death with a single palm strike without any way of retaliating. The remaining 3 golden cores did not manage to escape far either before they were murdered by Su Zimo one after another. Si Junyu stood on the spot motionlessly. He could tell clearly that given his strength, he wouldn't be able to escape from the middle-aged monk's pursuit even if he wanted to. Before long, after the other 4 were killed, the middle-aged monk returned and walked straight towards Si Junyu. Si Junyu's face was pale as a sheet, but he pretended to be calm and said with cupped fists, "Great monk, I'm the prince of the great Xia dynasty. As long as you let me off, I'll be immensely grateful and I'm willing to agree to any terms of exchange. Once I ascend the throne, I can even help you with the power of my entire dynasty." Su Zimo walked before Si Junyu and reached out with an indifferent expression, grabbing the latter towards him by the throat. Si Junyu rolled his eyes as his feet left the ground and kicked furiously. He could not speak at all and could only let out odd sounds. Su Zimo leaned in and whispered into Si Junyu's ears. "The power of your entire dynasty means nothing to a fraction of her. Since you dare to lay your hands on her, I'm going to kill you." "Why you?" Si Junyu's face was turning purplish and he seemed like he wanted to ask something. Su Zimo continued, "I'll also let you die with a complete understanding of things today. I'm Su Zimo and your brother, Jun Hao, was killed by me." Si Junyu's eyes widened with disbelief. Su Zimo. That was a name that nobody had mentioned for 5 years. He was still alive. "You can join your brother in hell," Su Zimo said calmly before exerting strength in his fingers, breaking Si Junyu's throat with a snap. Si Junyu died on the spot. In less than 15 minutes, 2 nascent souls, 20 golden cores and a prince of Great Xia were all killed at this place. None of them were spared. Ji Yaoxue had a pensive expression with raised brows as she looked at Su Zimo with a somewhat strange gaze. Perfected Lord Mingzhe took a deep breath of air before heading forward to greet Su Zimo with a deep bow. "I am Perfected Lord Mingzhe of the Great Zhou Dynasty. Many thanks for your help earlier on, Great Monk." As a nascent soul, it was truly rare for him to extend such politeness to a golden core. "No worries." Su Zimo waved it off and said indifferently, "This treacherous place is filled with dangers and the Dragon Burial Valley is an unlucky place. You guys should not come here anymore in the future." "All right, thank you for the advice, Great Monk," Perfected Lord Mingzhe nodded. Right then, Ji Yaoxue walked over as well, glaring at Su Zimo. "May I know your name and sect or faction, Great Monk?" It was a somewhat illogical question. Her attitude and tone was more like someone that was interrogating another person. Perfected Lord Mingzhe glanced at Ji Yaoxue and frowned slightly. He could sense that there was something mysterious about the middle-aged monk's background and the way he conducted himself. Up till now, the latter had not mentioned why he helped them or why he killed everyone from the Great Xia dynasty. However, Ji Yaoxue was behaving even more strangely. Su Zimo lowered his head and pulled down the prayer beads on his left hand that only had 4 Buddha beads before saying calmly, "I'm Ming Xian and I don't belong to any sect or faction." "Ming Xian." Ji Yaoxue murmured softly before looking deeply at Su Zimo. "Perfected Lord Mingzhe and I are injured and we can't fight anymore. Since you said that this place is treacherous, can you escort us out?" It was an even ruder request. Perfected Lord Mingzhe was about to speak when the middle-aged monk nodded after a moment of silence. "All right." Perfected Lord Mingzhe was stunned. However, he saw Ji Yaoxue smile brightly. "Thank you, Great Monk." For the past 5 years, Perfected Lord Mingzhe had been by Ji Yaoshue's side, ensuring her safety. Ever since the death of the strongest monster incarnate in history 5 years ago, he had not seen such a smile appear on Ji Yaoshue's face. It was dazzling, like the rainbow after a downpour. It was as though every single bit of sadness that this woman kept in her heart for the past 5 years had vanished at this moment. As Su Zimo looked at Ji Yaoshue's smile, a phrase appeared in his mind. A smile that resembles a flower's blossom. However, there was no flower in this world that could compare to the smile of the woman before him. Avoiding his gaze, Su Zimo counted his prayer beads at an even faster speed. He lowered his head and took the front, saying softly, "Let's go." Perfected Lord Mingzhe and confused and followed instinctively. Ji Yaoshue pursed her lips with a slight hint of dejection in her eyes. However, she smiled again soon after. No matter what, today was a day worth being happy about. Chapter 602. Great Monk, do you recognize me? Chapter 602. Great Monk, do you recognize me? 3 odd-looking people appeared in the Great Qian ruins. The leader was a middle-aged monk with prayer beads in his hands. He had a calm expression and without any cultivation, was no different from a mortal. Behind him was a man and woman, both who were severely injured. There was a high chance that these 3 would meet with an attack in the Great Qian ruins. It was way too common for people to kill others and steal their treasures in this place. However, along the way, many cultivators who caught sight of them stayed far away and did not dare to provoke them. That was because everyone could clearly see that there were initially countless otherworldly soldiers in the palace. However, all of the otherworldly soldiers gave way to these 3 people wherever they passed. The 3 of them walked through the palace without any otherworldly soldiers obstructing their way. Perfected Lord Mingzhe was secretly impressed. He was definitely not the reason for the otherworldly soldiers' wariness. When he arrived, even though he was a nascent soul, those otherworldly soldiers charged at them fearlessly. To think that all of them would choose to stay away from the middle-aged monk. There seemed to be a fog shrouding the middle-aged monk such that nobody could make out his secrets. The strangest thing was this man's identity. He could not be considered as a cultivator since there was no spirit energy fluctuation from within his body. He could not be considered as a mortal as well since he could kill nascent souls. This man was well versed in a sound secret skill. Anyone that inherited a sound secret skill would be from a super sect or top faction. However, none of the 6 Buddhist monasteries were located in the north region. So where did this man come from? Along the way, Perfected Lord Mingzhe was filled with questions that he could not understand. Ji Yaoshue tagged along at the back, watching the back view of the middle-aged monk with a conflicted expression. There were countless times when she wanted to speak but chose not to eventually. Just like that, the 3 of them passed through the palace and the ruins in silence. After sending Ji Yaoshue and Perfected Lord Mingzhe outside the ruins, Su Zimo stopped in his tracks and turned around, saying softly with a lowered head, "Patrons, do take your leave as soon as possible. I'll be bidding farewell here." Ji Yaoshue bit her red lip gently in silence. "Thank you for your life-saving grace, great monk. I'll definitely remember today's gratitude to you," Perfected Lord Mingzhe greeted with cupped fists. Su Zimo nodded and returned with a single-handed bow before turning to leave. Up till the end, he did not dare to meet with Ji Yaoshue's eyes. He did not dare to look at her directly. After hesitating for a long time, Ji Yaoshue chose to speak eventually. "Reverend, do you have anything you wish to say? This is a dangerous place. Please don't come here again from now on, patron." Su Zimo's back was facing Ji Yaoshue and he did not turn back as he continued forward while saying calmly, "When will I be able to meet you again, Reverend?" Ji Yaoshue asked once more. Su Zimo paused in his tracks and only replied after pondering for a long time, "We will naturally meet again if there's affinity." Perfected Lord Mingzhe frowned tightly and looked back and forth at the middle-aged monk and Ji Yaoshue in confusion. Ji Yaoshue only let out a deep breath of air after the middle-aged monk's figure disappeared fully at the edge of the ruins. "Uncle Ming, let's go." Perfected Lord Mingzhe could not help but ask, "Do you know him, Empress?" "Ming Xian." Ji Yaoshue smiled and shook her head. "I don't." Perfected Lord Mingzhe was even more puzzled. Because this was not part of the Great Zhou Dynasty's territory and the both of them were injured, they did not dare to linger and left in the air riding on their flying swords. Su Zimo felt conflicted on his return. Eventually, he did not choose to acknowledge his relationship with Ji Yaoxue. He did not know what he should say. He did not know how to face Ji Yaoxue. He could not deny that she was extremely important to him. However, he was going to leave the North region and even Tianhuang mainland at the end of the day. As for Ji Yaoxue, she was the Empress of Great Zhou and carried the hopes of the dynasty's flourish. The both of them were on different paths. Right then, Su Zimo paused in his tracks and frowned. He was distracted in deep thoughts the entire time and had not noticed that someone was following him. Of course, it seemed like that the person did not harbor any evil intentions towards him. Otherwise, he would have been able to sense it with his spirit perception even if he was distracted. "Who are you? Come on out." Su Zimo glanced sideways and commented indifferently. "Great monk, do you recognize me?" A tender voice sounded, somewhat coquettish and spiteful. Su Zimo's heart skipped a beat. Instantly, he recited the Sanskrit of the damning mantra mentally to calm himself down. It was Demoness Ji. Her bewitchment powers had turned even more frightening after 5 years. If not for the fact that Su Zimo had chanted sutras and comprehended Buddhism for the past 5 years, he would have definitely exposed himself with just that single remark. It seemed like Demoness Ji had also benefited immensely from the human emperor's palace and had advanced her power significantly. Su Zimo turned around and looked at Demoness Ji, who was not far away. After 5 years, Demoness Ji seemed to have gotten skinnier. However, there was no way to hide that peerless face that could bewitch the masses and that body that could charm the entire world. Her beautiful brows curved slightly in a pitiable manner. Her eyes shimmered like the surface of water. The young woman bit her alluring cherry lips in a grumbling manner. Su Zimo glanced at her expressionlessly before turning back and shaking his head. "I don't. Great monk, you may not recognize me, but I recognize you." A fragrance wafted over as Ji Yaoxue shifted towards Su Zimo with light steps. It seemed like she was about to cast herself into his embrace by the looks of it. Su Zimo was secretly troubled. The person he was most frightened of in this lifetime was this demoness before him. In a flash, Su Zimo dodged to the side. "Female patron, please respect yourself." Su Zimo clasped his palms together and said deeply. "Sure." Demoness Ji harumphed and grumbled coyly. "Great monk, now you're asking me to respect myself. Back in that stone coffin, you took quite a bit of advantage of me." Su Zimo's mouth twitched. In the past, the two of them were squeezed into a stone coffin and had to escape for their lives from the bottom of the river. The stone coffin was extremely cramped and it was unavoidable for them to have physical contact. By mentioning this, it was clear that Demoness Ji had recognized him. Demoness Ji pursued the topic relentlessly. "Great, now you're going to avoid taking responsibility for it after shaving your head and holding a set of prayer beads." Initially, Su Zimo was still contemplating whether or not he should admit to it. After all, there was nothing she could do even if he refused to admit it. However, Demoness Ji's words turned increasingly nasty, as though there was truly something between them. Su Zimo could not take it anymore and coughed gently to interrupt. "Demoness Ji, what do you want?" "Humph." She raised her head and pouted her lips, asking, "Great monk, didn't you say that you don't know me?" After a moment of silence, Su Zimo said, "Thank you for the help rescuing the citizens of the Yen country along with Pure Maiden sect 5 years ago." When she heard that, Demoness Ji's eyes welled up with a layer of mist as she said, "Su Zimo, you're truly cruel. Why don't you show yourself when you're clearly alive? My golden core has already been crippled and I've offended the entire North region with everyone taking me as a demon. Nothing good will come out of anyone that associates themselves with me." Su Zimo shook his head and replied, "Furthermore, I'm being hunted. Although the North region is huge, there's nowhere that can accommodate me." Chapter 603. Junior Brother, You're Poisoned. Chapter 603. Junior Brother, You're Poisoned. When Demoness Ji saw the dejected look on Su Zimo's face, she was suddenly reminded of his situation and could not bear to blame him. His kin and friends were all in the North region. If he had any other choice, he wouldn't have chosen to reside in seclusion. Furthermore, his golden core was crippled. His past was resplendent, extreme foundation establishment, second after the human emperor, suppressed the paragons of the immortal, Buddhist and fiend sects beneath the human emperor's palace, overwhelming everyone from the North region, incinerating nascent souls and lauded as the #1 monster incarnate in history. But now, he had fallen from grace and was left with nothing. In fact, he did not even have a place that could accommodate him. Who could endure and accept such a blow? Initially, Demoness G was filled with grievance. However, after hearing Su Zimo's statement, she felt her heart wrench. She said softly, "Zimo, you can come over to Pure Maiden's sect. We will protect you." Protect a demon? Su Zimo laughed in a self-deprecating manner. Demoness G opened her mouth and seemed like she wanted to reply, but eventually, nothing came forth. While she could ignore everything, she could not guarantee that it would be the same for her sect. Although Pure Maiden's sect was a fiend sect, they were humans. Humans had a long-standing feud with demons, and there was no way for one party to accommodate the other unless there was a blood oath signed. Demoness G said, "Zimo, you can explain that you are not a demon. The human emperor's palace will definitely not let any demons within." Su Zimo laughed coldly, shaking his head. Given his personality and pride, there was no way he would explain something like that personally. In other words, even if he was willing to explain, who would believe him? The most basic reasoning was that no demon would be able to enter the human emperor's palace. Who wouldn't be able to understand that? However, some people merely chose to ignore the fact. The truth was no longer of importance. What was important was that the entire North region wanted Su Zimo dead. It did not matter even if he explained, they could term him as a demon or fiend as long as they wanted to. "What plans do you have from now on? Are you going to just hide forever?" Demoness G asked. "I'm waiting for an opportunity." Su Zimo replied gradually, "When I reappear, it will also be the time for me to leave the North region." Leave the North region? Demoness G frowned slightly. The North region was way too huge with dangers lurking everywhere. Even if Su Zimo was in perfect condition, it was unrealistic for him to get through the North region unharmed, let alone now that his golden core was crippled. Demoness G's heart skipped a beat as she blurted at the thought of a possibility, the ancient battlefield. "That's right." Su Zimo nodded. The intermediate ancient battlefield would open up 15 years later. As long as he could enter the intermediate ancient battlefield, just like Xiaoning, Lang Rou and the others, he would be able to head to the other regions or even the middle continent of Tianhuang mainland through the teleportation points. This time round, Su Zimo intended to take his elder brother, Su Hong, with him. Previously, Ji Yaoxue mentioned that Su Hong's health was turning worse. The blow to Su Hong after receiving news of Su Zimo's death and the plight of the citizens of the Yan country was unimaginable. Furthermore, he was already injured after the failed assassination attempt on the king of Yan, Zhao Qian. As such, Su Zimo did not know how long more his brother could hold out for. After all, Su Hong was not a cultivator and had a limited lifespan. In another 15 years, Su Hong would be in his 60s and would only have around 40 years' worth of lifespan at the most. Su Zimo wanted to bring Su Hong along with him to look for Xiaoning in the middle continent. Su Hong's final moments must be spent with the two of them. Furthermore, ever since Xiaoning left Pingyang town and joined Ji Yaoxue in Azure Frost sect, she had not met with Su Hong again. In the blink of an eye, more than 10 years had passed. The reason why Xiaoning started her path of cultivation and focused wholeheartedly on elixir refinement, even joining Elixir Yang sect, was because she wanted to extend Su Hong's lifespan. It would be best if Xiaoning had a way of extending Su Hong's lifespan by the time they met. "Have you really made up your mind to leave?" Demoness G could not conceal her disappointment and murmured softly with a dim gaze. "What about me, I mean my sister?" Su Zimo was silent. "She knows you so well. If even I can recognize you, she must have recognized you long ago." Demoness G sighed gently. "It's just that she understands you and knows that you've got your difficulties. That's the reason why she did not force or expose you. It's good that she recognized me. At least she knows that I'm alive and doesn't have to worry," Su Zimo replied. After a moment of silence he continued, "After you return, Pay more attention to those around her. Now that she's the Empress, her movements should be kept secret. I suspect that the ambush she met here meant that there's someone that doesn't want her to return alive. Don't worry, I'll do my best to help my sister. Silence ensued between the both of them. Demoness G did not say anything and merely looked at Su Zimo quietly. A long time later he said softly, "Go on back. Take care then." Demoness G was dejected and her eyes were swollen and red. A moment later, she sniffed and forced a smile before faking a smile. "Let's have a final hug as a farewell." Su Zimo hesitated for a moment before nodding. Heading forward, he hugged Demoness G in a gentlemanly manner. A crafty look flashed through Demoness G's eyes as she tilted her head and pecked Su Zimo on the cheek with her red lips gently. He was stunned. Her hair brushed by his face and he was overwhelmed by a fragrance. She had already turned and fled. He. She laughed and her eyes turned into a pair of crescent moons. She was elated without any bit of dejection at all. Damned Demoness. Su Zimo grit his teeth. You're so stupid. Demoness G made a funny face at Su Zimo with disdain in her eyes, pouting her lips. If you want to leave, go ahead. I can't care less. You took advantage of me in that stone coffin. There's no way I'm going to let you off. Humph. I merely just collected a little bit of interest. Demoness G waved her fist. Su Zimo did not say anything and turned to leave. With his back facing Demoness G, he did not see the sadness and reluctance in the depths of her eyes. Even after he vanished at the edge of the ruins, a girl in pink stood alone gazing in his direction for the longest time. Su Zimo returned to the old temple and pushed the doors through. The little monk, Ming Zhan, was reciting sutras in the courtyard. When he saw Su Zimo, he exclaimed softly with surprise. "Junior brother, you're injured?" Ming Zhan asked. "I'm fine." In this short period of time, the wound on his chest that was pierced by the sword had already recovered. With a grim expression, Ming Zhan advanced and glared at Su Zimo's cheek, even sniffing it. "This is bad. You've got 2 red marks on your cheeks that have a fragrance. Junior brother, you're poisoned." That was the imprint of Demoness G's lips that Su Zimo forgot to wipe. At the bottom of the Dragon Burial Valley, Ming Zhan had not even seen a woman before, let alone know what it was. Su Zimo's expression darkened as he pushed Ming Zhan's bald head away, saying in a huff, "Bullshit." He wiped away the imprint on his cheek as he dashed into the sutra chamber. Ming Zhan looked at his master who had just appeared from the doors in confusion and asked with an earnest expression, "Master, why is junior brother angry?" The old monk replied, "He might be poisoned. See, I was right. He didn't believe me." Ming Zhan pouted his lips. Chapter 604. Tube. Chapter 604. Teach-you. Nighttime. Su Zimo tidied his attire and left the sutra chamber for the backyard. On this day every month, he would head over to where the red-headed ghost was for a bowl of mysterious spirit water. The old temple looked extremely creepy under the shroud of the night skies. The red-headed ghost sat on the ground and leaned against a tombstone with a bowl of spirit water before him. He had been waiting for a long time. Su Zimo was already used to everything and drank the spirit water right away when he arrived before the red-headed ghost. Suddenly the red-headed ghost said, "You've got a bow with you, right? Take it out and place it there." The red-headed ghost pointed to a tombstone not far away. Although Su Zimo did not understand why, he still obeyed and took out his moon concealment bow, placing it on the tombstone. The full moon had just risen and the cold moonlight spilled down, forming a column of light that focused on the moon concealment bow on the tombstone. The bow shone with an intense spirit light. Even without the infusion of spirit energy, the spirit patterns on the bow also had a bedazzling luster. The red-headed ghost said, "This is a quasi-connate spirit weapon and its 6th spirit pattern had already taken shape. As long as it continues to receive the essence of the moon here, it can definitely grow to become a connate spirit weapon." Su Zimo nodded. "You've also got a blood-red saber with you, right? Take it out also." Blood Quencher. Su Zimo froze for a moment. Blood Quencher was a perfect-grade spirit weapon he crafted personally, and wasn't a quasi-connate spirit weapon. Could it be? Although he was confused, Su Zimo handed Bloodquencher over still. The red-headed ghost received Bloodquencher and touched across its blade gently before nodding. This saber was refined decently. When it was formed, it was synthesized with a frightening bloodline that gave it its bloodthirsty nature. Back when he refined Bloodquencher, Su Zimo nearly failed and only managed to forge it completely after using his bloodline to temper the flames. Although the red-headed ghost did not witness it personally, the fact that his guess was not far off the mark was proof that his insights were sharp. The red-headed ghost rose and arrived at an empty space nearby. Exerting strength in his arm, he stabbed Bloodquencher into the ground, leaving only its handle exposed. Red-headed ghost, what are you doing? Su Zimo asked curiously. The people buried here were experts 10,000 years ago, and the bloodline that runs underground is incomparably strong, indestructible, and possesses a tremendous amount of might. There's a chance that this saber can grow into a connate spirit weapon if it's soaked here. Su Zimo's eyes lit up. With that, he would have 2 more connate spirit weapons with him, the Moon Concealment Bow and Bloodquencher, apart from the Coiling Dragon Seal and Black Gold Arrows. Unfortunately, the Mystic Gold Silk Armor was smashed right after it was repaired. There are way too many experts buried in this cemetery. Dead patriarchs, the blood of emperors. This is an extremely unlucky place. There's nothing to lose if nothing happens to the saber. However, if it can absorb their blood and grow into a connate spirit weapon, it will definitely be incomparably ferocious. The red-headed ghost glared at Bloodquencher coolly and snickered. Trouble will befall any weakling that lays their hands on this weapon. You should be careful too. In that period of time, the tremendous amount of energy in the spirit water had already spread through Su Zimo's body. He assumed a lotus position and began cultivating with the sutras of the mystic classic of the 12 demon kings of the great wilderness revolving through his mind. As he breathed, a thick demonic chi spewed out from his mouth. There was no tear on his blood-red inner core, and it had recovered to how it was before. The inner core revolved slowly with a ferocious demonic chi, creating ancient demons around him one after another. Centered among them, Su Zimo's eyes were tightly shut and his body was faintly visible. With a frightening aura, he was akin to the king of demons that looked down at everyone from above. He had relied on that mysterious spirit water for the past 5 years to help his inner core recover. Not only that, his body had turned even more frightening. Even though it was just a bowl of spirit water, the amount of energy it contained was enough to last Su Zimo for an entire month. If he continued cultivating this way, he would definitely attain greater mastery of his inner core in the next 15 years, and even have a chance of cultivating to the perfected realm. What's in that spirit water for it to possess such power? In the 5 years, Su Zimo had read many ancient manuals in the Sutra Chamber, but he could not find anything that fit the description. This was a question that he had asked the red-headed ghost more than once during this period of time. However, each time, the red-headed ghost would look at him oddly with a beguiling smirk without elaborating further. Thereafter, Su Zimo no longer questioned. The night was dark and the round moon hung high above. As the red-headed ghost looked at Su Zimo, a deep hint of envy flashed through the depths of his eyes. This cultivation technique is truly terrifying. The red-headed ghost lamented internally. It was an undeniable fact that humans were born innately weak. However, that demonic cultivation technique could allow a mortal to cultivate his body to such a frightening degree. He could see every single muscle on Su Zimo's body twitch imperceptibly with every single breath he exhaled. His tendons quivered, his bones shook, his blood marrow gushed, and his orifices shone with a divine light that was brighter than stars. With every single breath, he was refining his blood, flesh, tendons, bones, skin, organs and orifices. The red-headed ghost turned his gaze towards Su Zimo's exposed skin. As Su Zimo's cultivation deepened, the surface of his skin turned coarser. Upon closer inspection, it could be seen that the surface of his skin was intertwined with intersecting rhombus scars over and over again. However, the scars were so subtle that even Su Zimo did not notice them. When he saw those scars, the red-headed ghost was delighted and could barely conceal his joy. Before long the night passed. The moment a sliver of daybreak broke out from the horizon, Su Zimo took a deep breath of air and absorbed the demonic chi in his surroundings back into his body. Everything vanished completely in the blink of an eye. Su Zimo opened his eyes with a demonic glint flashing through. The red-headed ghost asked in a seemingly pleased manner. You've once consumed something from the dragon race, right? Su Zimo was shocked. The first thing that came to mind was that massive dragon egg. Su Zimo said darkly, yes. Back in a human emperor's palace, I've consumed a blood-flesh elixir made from the dragon race in order to cultivate a technique left behind by the human emperor. Just an elixir? The red-headed ghost raised his brow. After thinking through and deciding that there was nothing to hide, Su Zimo continued. Before that, I consumed half a dragon egg in a primordial ruin. A spark flickered through the red-headed ghost's eyes briefly. Hey, you've got quite a bit of guts. The red-headed ghost said with a fake smile and teasing tone. Sensing something amiss, Su Zimo frowned and asked, what's wrong? Nothing much. I was just asking casually. The red-headed ghost waved it off with an indifferent expression. When Su Zimo could not make out anything from the red-headed ghost's expression, he patted himself and got ready to leave. Hold on, hold on. Right then the red-headed ghost gestured for Su Zimo to sit down and said with a bright grin, today, I'm going to teach you something. Chapter 605. Legend of the Moon and Sunday. Chapter 605. Legend of the Moon and Sunday. Although the red-headed ghost was very knowledgeable, he had not taken the initiative to impart anything to Su Zimo during their 5 years of interaction. His sudden mention had Su Zimo intrigued. Right from the beginning, the red-headed ghost had not mentioned anything about his background. As such, Su Zimo was curious to see what the red-headed ghost could do. Su Zimo coughed gently. Let me say first that I'm not going to learn any puny tricks that you ghosts use. At the mention of ghost, the red-headed ghost's mouth cramped up and he seemed like he was about to get angry. However, on second thought, he chuckled gloatingly. At that moment, the sun had just risen. A sliver of light spilled onto the cemetery and purged away the darkness and spookiness. The red-headed ghost squinted at the rising sun from the corner of his eyes and a mysterious white glow flashed in his right eye. As time passed by, that light intensified and sunlight gushed into it endlessly, turning his right eye completely white with a bright glow. It was as though the red-headed ghost's right eye had achieved harmony with the blazing sun and fused together with it. Su Zimo glanced casually and was blinded with 2 streams of tears rolling down his face instantly. Alarmed, he closed his eyes immediately and did not dare to look anymore. How scary! His eyes were extremely strong after he cultivated the mystic classic of the 12 demon kings of the great wilderness and cleared both orifices. Back in the ancient battlefield, even when the paragon of Diamond Monastery released his sect's secret skill, Enraged Diamond Gaze, Su Zimo was not affected mentally. But now, his eyes were already dealt with such a blow from a side glance. If he had looked on directly, his eyes would have most likely gone blind. The most frightening thing was that even with his eyes closed, Su Zimo could still sense the power that was given off by the red-headed ghost's right eye. It was extremely tough and radiant. His right eye seemed to have turned into a blazing sun. Beside the red-headed ghost, Su Zimo felt like he could melt and dissipate at any moment. How could this be? A question popped into his mind. An intense scorching yang energy as such was the most effective at countering ghosts and they would want nothing more than to avoid it. How could the red-headed ghost possess such a method? Could it be that he was not a ghost? Suddenly, Su Zimo felt a sharp pain in his right eye. It was as though something was going to fall from his socket. He could not stop it even with his eyes closed. Ah! Su Zimo yelped in pain as his right eye swelled uncontrollably as though it was about to explode. His body shuddered and finally, he opened his eyes, unable to hold on any longer. His right eye had turned a sinister shade of white as well. It was completely white. It was as though something was floating within and was fused with his right eye. The glow in the red-headed ghost's right eye dissipated as he glared at Su Zimo's right eye intently while nodding. Indeed! The red-headed ghost curled his finger. A jade-white cobblestone that sparkled and glowed fell out from Su Zimo's right eye and hovered in midair. The swelling sensation vanished completely. As though a weight was lifted off his shoulders, Su Zimo fell to the ground and sat limply while panting heavily. This stone! Frowning, Su Zimo recalled something. Back in the cold cesspool of Tsonglang mountain range, he encountered Tao Lord Extreme Fire with his dying breath. At that time, this stone was placed right beside Tao Lord Extreme Fire. According to Tao Lord Extreme Fire, this white stone was retrieved from a ruin, but it could not be stored in a storage bag, and he did not know what purpose it served either. When Su Zimo picked it up, the stone vanished bizarrely. Immediately after, he felt a sharp pain in his mind and almost fainted. Thereafter, a secret skill appeared in his mind, the Illumination Sword Formation. At that time, he had a hunch. It seemed like that stone had burrowed into his body. To think that it would fall out from his right eye now. The red-headed ghost held the white stone with his fingertips and rubbed it gently with a forlorn look, as though he had picked up a treasure. "What's that?" Su Zimo could not help but ask. Legend has it that in the depths of the universe's void currents, before life was born, everything was chaos. As time passed by, Yin and Yang were created from the chaos. At their extremities, the powers of Extreme Yang and Extreme Yin gathered endlessly, forming two terrifying existences known as the Extreme Yang Illumination and Extreme Yin Nether Glow. The red-headed ghost's voice sounded, as though he had passed through time and was describing obscure secrets. The powers of the Illumination and Nether Glow were so frightening that they shrouded the universe and extended through the trichiliocosm. The sun and moon of Tianhuang mainland are created from a trickle of power from the Illumination and Nether Glow. A trickle of power? Su Zimo was shocked. Be it the sun or the moon, the power they contained was something that Su Zimo would never be able to reach given his current cultivation realm. The only way he could cultivate with the essence of the sun and moon was after he cultivated an essence spirit, and turned into a fiend demon. The power of the sun and moon was extremely massive and endless. But now the red-headed ghost was actually saying that the sun and moon above them was merely created by a trickle of power from two frightening entities. The red-headed ghost laughed. The universe void currents are so great that you can't possibly imagine them. There are a trillion other entities like Tianhuang mainland. In other words, there's also a trillion more of the sun and moon that you're seeing right now. Su Zimo was dumbfounded. Everything that the red-headed ghost said had completely unearthed all his knowledge. After pondering, the red-headed ghost continued. Of course, those are only mystical legends that no one can verify. Or rather, those that can verify them are not in Tianhuang mainland and have already ascended to the upper world. After pausing for a moment, the red-headed ghost looked at Su Zimo deeply. That red-robed woman definitely knows about these things. Su Zimo remained silent. After looking at Su Zimo for a long time, the red-headed ghost closed in. His eyes blazed with the flames of gossip as he asked curiously, "Little monk, what's your relationship with the woman? Why did she help you so much?" After holding it in for 5 years, the red-headed ghost finally popped the question. Su Zimo was stunned. Master and disciple. On the surface, the both of them were like master and disciple. However, Su Zimo had never been taken in as her disciple officially. In the depths of his heart, he did not want to acknowledge them as master and disciple either. Friends. They couldn't be considered as that. Benefactor. Sort of. That question stumped Su Zimo for a moment. "Hurry and tell me. You're killing me." The red-headed ghost scratched his ears and cheeks impatiently. After pondering for a long time, Su Zimo said slowly, "She will be my Tao companion." The red-headed ghost shuddered with an agape mouth and his eyes widened massively. Swoosh! The jade-white stone in his hands dropped on the ground at the same time as his jaws. A moment later, he gulped and the way he looked at Su Zimo gradually changed as he praised, "Little monk, you've really got guts." Chapter 606. Illumination Eye. Chapter 606. Illumination Eye. Su Zimo pointed at the jade-white stone on the ground and asked, "What does that stone has to do with the illumination and nether glow that you mentioned?" After pondering for a moment, Su Zimo said again, "I once obtained a secret skill from that stone, the Illumination Sword Formation." "There's no mistake." The red-headed ghost nodded. "This should be the legendary Illumination Stone." "Illumination Stone?" Su Zimo frowned. The red-headed ghost replied, "There's different sayings as to where the Illumination Stone came from and how it was formed. Some people theorize that it was formed from the extreme yang energy of a world, while others think that it's a speck of dust from illumination. However, it's undeniable that the Illumination Stone is related to the Illumination Stone. The Illumination Sword formation that you comprehended should be a secret skill that someone comprehended using the Illumination Stone. Su Zimo went deep into thought. Indeed, when he released the Illumination Sword formation, it was like a blazing sun, and the sword cheese resembled the rays of the sun as well. The red-headed ghost continued, "The secret skill that I'm about to impart you is related to the Illumination Stone as well. In the past, the person who created this secret skill also comprehended it through the Illumination Stone. This visual technique." Visual technique. Su Zimo's eyes lit up. Visual techniques were also secret techniques used to cultivate one's eyes. It did not matter if they were immortals, Buddhas or fiends, nor did it matter if they were humans or demons. Dermic formulations to cultivate one's eyes were the rarest types of legacies. That was because for every race, their eyes were the weakest parts of their bodies. For tempering of flesh and blood or refinement of tendons and bones, if any issues cropped up during cultivation, be it whether they were severely injured or their bones and tendons were snapped, everything could be recuperated to a complete recovery as long as it was adjusted in time. However, a mistake in the cultivation of one's eyes would lead to a huge problem: blindness. The eyes were simply way too fragile. For mortals, a single breeze was enough to cause them to close their eyes instinctively. Their eyes would feel discomfort even with a grain of sand inside, let alone endure cultivation. The reason why visual techniques were so rare and precious were because few people would dare to risk their eyes to try and create a secret skill. If any mishaps happened, they would go blind before their secret skills were even created. Although the mystic classic of the 12 demon kings of the great wilderness was powerful, there was no legacy of a dermic formulation for eye cultivation. The visual techniques spread in the cultivation world had varying strengths, and their directions were different as well. The more famous ones were those such as the bewitching eye, enraged diamond gaze, and flaming golden eyes. Cultivators versed in visual techniques were definitely stronger than anyone else of the same cultivation realm in terms of combat strength. That was because visual techniques were instantaneous and were the most difficult to defend against. Although it was a good thing to be able to cultivate a visual technique, there was no joy in Su Zimo's eyes. Red-headed ghost, my golden core is already crippled and I can't store any spirit energy in my body. How do I cultivate a visual technique? Su Zimo asked with a frown. The red-headed ghost waved it off casually. It's fine, you don't need spirit energy to cultivate this visual technique. There was no need for spirit energy. Su Zimo froze for a moment. At Nascent Soul Realm, cultivators cultivated their essence spirits and could make use of dermic powers to cultivate. However, before that, they had to make use of spirit energy for any spirit art and secret skill. That was where their foundation was. How could there be a secret skill that did not require spirit energy to cultivate? Unless it wasn't a secret skill for humans. For his demonic cultivation, Su Zimo did not require spirit energy as a foundation. Frowning, he asked, "What is required to cultivate if not spirit energy?" No matter the type of cultivation, energy would not appear out of thin air. Demonic cultivation required the consumption of flesh. Immortality cultivation required the absorption of spirit chi into one's body. The visual technique would definitely have to make use of something to refine both eyes. The red-headed ghost stared at the rising heating sun not far away and said coolly, "Using that?" Su Zimo's heart skipped a beat and a look of shock spread across his face. Cultivate his eyes by using the blazing sun. Ordinary cultivators are not able to stare at the blazing sun for prolonged periods of time. Although Su Zimo could glare at the sun after clearing his 7 orifices, it would still be akin to setting himself on fire if he wanted to make use of the energy of the blazing sun to cultivate his eyes. Initially, I did not intend on imparting this visual technique to you because the cultivation process is indeed extremely dangerous. A single mistake would cause one of your eyes to go blind. The red-headed ghost picked up the illumination stone and handed it back to Su Zimo. However, I discovered this within you. You have the illumination stone with you. As such, the success rate of cultivating this visual technique will be extremely high and your efforts will be halved. When he heard that, Su Zimo gradually came to a realization. The visual technique was comprehended by an expert of the past using the illumination stone. Now that the illumination stone was in his possession, It would be much easier to cultivate the visual technique with a significant decrease in risk. Su Zimo received the Illumination Stone. Similar to before, the white cobblestone vanished in his hands once more. Immediately after, he felt a sharp pain in his mind and his right eye turned milky white and sinister. A moment later, it returned to normal. The blazing sun above us was formed from a trickle of energy from illumination. By making use of the blazing sun, you can nurture extreme yang energy in your eyes. The red-headed ghost said darkly, once released, that energy will be able to incinerate all living beings and destroy everything. In truth, Su Zimo could already imagine the might of the visual technique without the red-headed ghost's elaboration. Normally, demons would have to advance to the nascent soul realm and cultivate their essence spirits before they could absorb the essence of the sun and moon for cultivation purposes. But now, he had only just formed his inner core. In other words, it meant that his inner core realm would already be tapping into a higher level of energy. When cultivated to its peak, this visual technique is, hee. The red-headed ghost chuckled oddly. One of your eyes will turn into a sun. Pest. Su Zimo gasped. There was a blazing sun hidden in his socket. The moment his eye was opened, a blazing sun would appear. Once released, that might be a power that even emperors wouldn't be able to withstand. Immediately after, Su Zimo remembered the doubt he had initially. Since it did not require spirit chi and made use of the sun to cultivate, rather than a human cultivation technique, it seemed more like a dermic formulation of the fiend demons. Suddenly, Su Zimo asked, Red-headed ghost, this visual technique is not a secret skill of humans, right? What do you care for? Are you going to cultivate it even if it's a secret skill of the demons? The red-headed ghost rolled his eyes and scoffed coldly. Humph, you're about to cultivate into a true fiend demon yourself anyway, so what are you bothered about? Su Zimo replied indifferently, although I conduct demonic cultivation, I'm not a demon. Hee. The red-headed ghost sneered, your human golden core is already crippled and you've only got a demon's inner core left in your body. Who would believe you if you said that you were a human? Su Zimo remained silent. A moment later, he asked in a seemingly casual manner, what's the name of this visual technique? Raising his brow, the red-headed ghost looked at Su Zimo in deep thought. As though he read the latter's intentions, he chuckled. Let's call it Illumination Eye. Wily fox. Su Zimo cussed internally. He had already sensed vaguely that the red-headed ghost had a strange identity. In reality, he was also trying to deduce something by asking about the name of the visual technique. To think that the red-headed ghost did not let anything slip. Illumination Eye was clearly a name he had just made up. Chapter 607. Old Friend's Descendant. Chapter 607. Old Friend's Descendant. After the red-headed ghost imparted the Sutra of the Visual Technique secret skill to Su Zimo, he instructed, although you have the Illumination Stone, you have to be careful when you cultivate. The best timings to cultivate are at dawn and dusk. If you cultivate in the afternoon where the power of the sun is at its peak, your eyes won't be able to take it and it will hinder your progress. Su Zimo remembered everything to heart. This was something that he had to be careful about or it would be too late for regrets if he went blind. A while later, after Su Zimo ensured that he left nothing out, he got up and headed to the front yard. The little fox stood nearby with a dazed gaze and snoozing. Go on. Su Zimo fondled the little fox's forehead and smiled. The little fox was a demon and on this day of each month, she would come to the backyard for a bowl of spirit water from the red-headed ghost as well. Initially, she was extremely reluctant and was always scared out of her wits, shivering all over. Su Zimo had to carry her over personally before she gradually adapted. After 5 years, there was something that felt strange to Su Zimo. Even though the little fox had already formed her core, she was unable to take on a human form or speak. Su Zimo merely thought that it was a unique trait of the fox race and did not think too much about it. When she saw Su Zimo return to the front yard, the little fox ran over to the red-headed ghost and propped up her tiny paws. She kowtowed earnestly to the red-headed ghost and actually spoke in human tongue. Greetings, Senior. The little fox's voice was extremely gentle and charming. Any male living being that heard it would definitely be filled with wild thoughts and their hearts would pound. However, The red-headed ghost was very calm and nodded. Why don't you want to take on your human form? The red-headed ghost asked with a fake smile. The little fox lowered her head and blushed. When the red-headed ghost saw that, he could not help but burst into laughter and teased. You're afraid that you're going to turn lustful, huh? The little fox turned even more embarrassed and shook her head repeatedly like a tiny drum. After laughing for a little, the red-headed ghost retracted his smile. You're thinking that the only way to stay by his side is if you continue taking on this form. The little fox lowered her head without replying. It was a silent acknowledgement. Of course, that was only part of the reason. The other part was that the little fox was clear that if she took on her human form, she would most likely not be as intimate with Su Zimo. Humans were particular about chastity and there would always be a barrier between them. Right now, she could burrow into his embrace and do whatever she wanted, be it snooze or be bashful with him. The red-headed ghost pouted his lips and grumbled, even after that lad joined the Buddhist sect and shaved to become a monk, he's still enjoying such a flourishing love life. I didn't even get to enjoy such treatment in the past. After returning to the courtyard, Su Zimo sat down and gazed at the gradually rising sun far away. At that moment, the sun had just risen and wasn't too blinding. He had to make use of this time to cultivate. He took a deep breath of air and recited the Sutra of Illumination Eye in his mind while gazing at the sun with his right eye. As time passed by, it seemed like a trickle of light was entering his right eye. His right eye gradually turned white. The white pupil looked sinister and emitted a faint glow as it absorbed the sunlight continuously to refine. The temperature of his right eye was steadily climbing. Although it was a little painful, it was still endurable. Su Zimo could clearly feel his right eye fusing into one with the illumination stone. As sunlight entered the illumination stone, the extremely tough energy softened significantly. The damage to his right eye was also reduced to a minimum. From this day forth, apart from his mystic classic of the 12 demon kings of the great wilderness cultivation at night, Su Zimo would also cultivate this visual technique every dawn and dusk. There was still no activity in his dantian. However, Su Zimo did not give up and spent most of his daytime in the sutra chamber, browsing through the ancient books left behind by the two great ancient Buddhist monasteries. There were way too many ancient and precious books in the sutra chamber. How frightening was the foundation of two super sects. There were not only secret skills, but also weapon, elixir, talisman and formation techniques as well as many other things that were long lost. For example, in an ancient formation secret technique, there was something known as the spirit lock ancient formation. It was said that when set up, even the essence spirits of nascent souls would be restricted and they wouldn't be able to use their dharmic powers. There were many other secret skills similar to it. However, Su Zimo was unable to comprehend them because his cultivation realm was not high enough. Days passed by one after another. In the blink of an eye, another 5 years passed. Su Zimo had already spent 10 years at the bottom of Dragon Burial Valley. Evening. He sat on the ground and gazed at the direction of the sunset with the Mingwang prayer beads in his hands. An evening glow shrouded his body and his aura was dignified, like a magnificent Buddha. His right eye shone with a brilliance that could not be ignored. After 10 years, Su Zimo's dantian was still empty like a black hole without a trickle of spirit qi. However, there was no sign of disappointment on his eyes and face. After chanting sutras and paying respect to Buddha for 10 years, Su Zimo gained a tranquil aura. He was neither happy nor sad, unaffected by affection and humiliation, and was almost in a Zen state. This was a sign of someone that was deep in the wisdom of Buddhism. The Siraka flower was akin to a wisdom root. Su Zimo's attainment in Buddhism deepened by the day. Backyard of the old temple. The old monk sat on a stone step and faced the red-headed ghost in the cemetery. Old monk, there's still no activity in that lad's dantian. I think that there's probability no more hope for him to restart with his immortality cultivation, the red-headed ghost said. How difficult is it for someone to rebuild their foundation after it's destroyed with their dantian crushed? Throughout history, there had been countless paragons and monster incarnates but none of them succeeded. The old monk sighed gently. However, the lad's comprehension of Buddhism is deepening. If he's able to restart his cultivation, he will be able to attain the true legacy of the Buddhist sections. What nonsense legacy! The red-headed ghost pouted his lips in disdain. Without spirit energy, he won't be able to release the methods of the Buddhist sects even if he knows them. What's the use? If it was up to me, I'd ask him to forget all about recovering his golden core and focus wholeheartedly on his demonic cultivation. Can't you see that even without his golden core, his actual strength now is only stronger than he was 10 years ago? The old monk shook his head. If he gives up on recovering his golden core and continues on his demonic cultivation, the moment he advances to Nascent Soul Realm would be the moment he turns into a fiend demon completely. Isn't that good? The red-headed ghost mumbled. Right then, a spirit light descended outside the old temple. The old monk slanted his head and beckoned, causing a spirit crane to land on his palm. Frowning, he opened the spirit crane and took a look. With a conflicted expression, he sighed gently. The descendant of our old friend is here. I hate the aura on this spirit crane. The red-headed ghost squinted at the spirit crane and barked coldly. Is it him? His descendant? The old monk nodded. The red-headed ghost bolted upright and the chains on his body rattled. Instantly, he turned murderous. The old monk looked at the red-headed ghost. Calm down. No matter what, Daming and Fahua monasteries are indebted to him. Furthermore, it's just a junior that has arrived. What are you getting worked up for? Upon hearing that, the red-headed ghost calmed down temporarily and sat down once more with a terrible expression. Chapter 608. Don't Go Overboard. Chapter 608. Don't Go Overboard. It was late at night. The red-headed ghost asked with a frown, what's his descendant here for? To borrow and browse through the mystic Dharmic Lotus Sutra, the old monk replied. Sneering, the red-headed ghost said, so, he's got his eyes on this #1 secret skill of the golden core. It's no wonder why he made the long journey here. The old monk continued, it's just a sutra. If his descendant wants to take a look, he's free to go through all the sutras in the sutra chamber. Aren't you generous? The red-headed ghost pouted and grumbled. Right then, Su Zimo arrived in the backyard, ready to obtain a bowl of spirit water from the red-headed ghost. The old monk put away the spirit crane and turned to leave expressionlessly. The red-headed ghost placed the spirit water in front of him. Thereafter, he laid down with his back facing Su Zimo in silence and brooded. Su Zimo was confused and did not know what tantrum the red-headed ghost was throwing. He did not ask or think more about it. After 10 years, he had some understanding towards the red-headed ghost. There were things that the red-headed ghost would take the initiative to say even if he did not ask. There were also things that the red-headed ghost would not say anything about no matter how he pressed on. Su Zimo reared his head and drank the spirit water before taking a seat to cultivate. Not long after the old monk left the old temple, he returned. There were 2 more people around him. To be precise, one of them was human and the other was a demon. The cultivator at the front looked young and was at Golden Core Realm. He wore purple robes with sharp brows and a defined set of features. With an indifferent expression, he gave off an aura that ruled over everything around him and suppressed all things. The purple-robed cultivator's eyes flickered and everything he passed by turned still, even the air. His mere presence was enough for someone to want to give up entirely. Behind the purple-robed cultivator was a burly man that was more than 2 meters tall and filled with hair from head to toe. His chest was bare, his bones were huge and his eyes gleamed with a scarlet glow. Anyone with a sharp eye would be able to tell that although the burly man had taken on human form, he was still a demon beast. The demonic chi shrouding the burly man was extremely thick and his eyes shimmered constantly. He was definitely not a kind soul. The old temple said, there's not much rules to this old temple. Other than the backyard where you must not step foot in, you are free to explore the other parts. You can retrieve any sutra that you wish to read as well. The purple-robed cultivator nodded and turned his gaze towards Ming Zhen. At that moment, Ming Zhen had just closed the sutra in his hands and was rising. Just as he was about to bow and greet the purple-robed cultivator, the cold voice of the latter sounded. Hand over that sutra in your hands, because I want to read. Ming Zhen froze momentarily. It was rare that there was someone else in the old temple. Even if this person did not say it, Ming Zhen would pass it to him automatically. But now, the tone of the purple-robed cultivator was truly detestable. It was more like an order. He stood on no courtesy at all. Ming Zhan could clearly feel that to the purple-robed cultivator, he was just ordering a servant about. Instinctively, Ming Zhan turned towards the old monk. The old monk sighed internally. After all, this was something between the younger generation. Although the purple-robed cultivator's attitude was unpleasant, it was not in his place to lecture the former. The old monk did not wish to interfere as long as both parties were not at one another's necks. The old monk returned to the majestic grand hall and closed his doors after leading the purple-robed cultivator into the old temple. "Monk, are you deaf? My master wants to read that sutra in your hands. What are you waiting for?" The hairy burly man behind the purple-robed cultivator hollered. Ming Zhan frowned. After a moment of hesitation, he handed the mystic dermic Lotus Sutra in his hands over. The purple-robed cultivator received it with an indifferent expression without even glancing at Ming Zhan. It was as though everything was only right. Ming Zhan was not bothered by it and merely smiled before turning to pick up another sutra to read. Right then, the doors of the sutra chamber were pushed open with a loud creak. A furry little thing walked out with fiery red fur that made it look like a ball of flames. It was the little fox who had just woken up. She yawned repeatedly and raised her tiny paws to rub her sleepy eyes. With a charmingly naive look, she nearly stumbled over the step of the sutra chamber entrance. Ming Zhan smiled. The purple-robed cultivator seemed oblivious to it as his attention was focused entirely on the mystic dermic Lotus Sutra in his hands. The more he read, the brighter his eyes lit up. When the hairy burly man behind him caught sight of the little fox, his eyes widened. The little fox shuddered and woke up. Grinning, the hairy burly man said, "Master, there's a fox chick here. I'm going to take her with me." "Yes," the purple-robed cultivator replied. "Ha ha ha ha." The hairy burly man's eyes lit up with a vile glint as he closed in on the little fox while smirking. "Little thing, where are you trying to hide?" He got even more excited when he looked at the little fox who was retreating continuously with a frightful expression. Swash! Suddenly, the hairy burly man felt his vision blur and another person appeared. Ming Zhan's palms were clasped together as he said with a deep voice, "Patron, please stop." The hairy burly man was overwhelmed by lust when his path forward was obstructed. Instantly, his expression turned extremely nasty and his eyes were filled with anger. "This fox chick is your Tao companion?" "No," Ming Zhan shook his head. "She's your spirit beast?" the hairy burly man asked again. "No," Ming Zhan shook his head. The hairy burly man straightened himself like a rod and glared down at Ming Zhan with a domineering aura, sneering, "Then why aren't you getting lost?" "No." This time round, Ming Zhan did not step back and his tone was resolute and unquestionable. "Monk, how strong are you to want to stand in my way?" The hairy burly man extended his palm and his fingernails shone with a cold gleam as he reached for Ming Zhan's head. If his attack landed, 5 bloody holes would appear on Ming Zhan's head immediately. "OM!" Without retreating or dodging, Ming Zhan chanted Sanskrit. "Roar!" The moment Ming Zhan recited his Sanskrit, the hairy burly man roared as well. In that instant, the entire world shook and the weather changed. That single roar disrupted Ming Zhan's damning mantra right away. The hairy burly man was frighteningly strong. With nowhere to retreat against the hairy burly man's descending palm, spirit energy surged out from Ming Zhan's fingernails and formed a lotus to receive the attack. Boom! The hairy burly man's palm collided against the lotus flower. There was a momentary pause. Instantly, the lotus flower shattered. Ming Zhan grunted dully and staggered 3 steps in retreat. Boom! Before he could react, the hairy burly man's fist descended once more like a gigantic hammer, pummeling so violent that the void exploded. A hesitant look flashed through Ming Zhan's eyes. Right now, the most effective method would be to release a golden core phenomenon. However, the release of a golden core phenomenon was also a message to fight to the death. At the end of the day, these 2 people were brought to the monastery by his master personally. Was he really going to fight them to the death with a golden core phenomenon? In that delay, the fist of the hairy burly man had already arrived before him. Ming Zhan could only channel his bloodline and prop up both arms to defend hastily as his golden core circulated with its full might. Bang! Sent flying by the hairy burly man's fist, Ming Zhan rolled a couple of times on the ground in a wretched manner. Hee. The hairy burly man charged forward with a ferocious glint in his eyes, barking coldly. How dare you stand in my way with such puny strength? Don't go overboard. Suddenly, another voice sounded from the courtyard. It was calm and tranquil, as though it had a mysterious magic that could make anyone lay down their weapons. Chapter 609. I'll discipline it for you. Chapter 609. I'll discipline it for you. Even when the hairy burly man engaged in a conflict with Ming Zhan, the purple-robed cultivator did not raise his head once. He had a calm expression and stayed out of things completely. It was as though everything was not important for him. In the eyes of the purple-robed cultivator, there was only the mystic dermic Lotus Sutra in his hands. However, the instant the voice rang, he frowned. This was the first time he had expressed emotions ever since he entered the old temple. After a moment of delay, the purple-robed cultivator raised his head slowly towards the voice. Unknowingly, another monk had appeared in the courtyard. Dressed in grey monk robes, he had refined features and a calm expression. His eyes shone with a clear glow, as though he could peer through all the wisdom in the universe. The moment the purple-robed cultivator caught sight of the grey-robed monk, he frowned again. His pupils constricted sinisterly. The grey-robed monk looked at him as well. Both their gazes met in midair. The purple-robed cultivator's lips curled with a playful look in his eyes. With an unchanged expression, the grey-robed monk walked to Ming Zhan and helped the latter up, patting away the dust on his body gently. Ming Zhan wiped away fresh blood from the corner of his lips and whispered, "Be careful, junior brother. This demon beast is extremely strong." The grey-robed monk was Su Zimo, who had arrived from the backyard. The instant he stepped foot into the courtyard, he saw the purple-robed cultivator. Or rather, this purple-robed cultivator would have been the first person he saw even if there were 10,000 people around. Nobody could ignore him at all. Su Zimo sensed an extreme sense of danger from the purple-robed cultivator. The instant he caught sight of this man, he felt his hairs stand on end. The only reason why he did not reveal any openings was because he had cultivated Zen and Buddhism for 10 years and had a firm mental state. Although they had not fought, Su Zimo was certain that this was the strongest golden core he ever encountered. This man was much scarier compared to Shi Wuya, whom he met 10 years ago. In fact, Su Zimo had a feeling that he would have definitely been defeated if he met this person 10 years ago. He would not be a match for this man even if he used all his trump cards and turned into his demon form. The purple-robed cultivator merely glanced once indifferently at Su Zimo before lowering his head to continue browsing the mystic dermic Lotus Sutra. That single glance was a clear warning. The hairy burly man beside him shrugged. The voice of the grey-robed monk before him seemed to have a mysterious energy that could purge away the hate in his heart, allowing him to calm down subconsciously. Uncanny! The hairy burly man roared from the depths of his throat. Monk, you want to interfere as well? The hairy burly man glared at Su Zimo fiercely and twisted his muscular neck with crackling sounds. Su Zimo did not even look at him. His gaze was still locked on the purple-robed cultivator as he smiled and asked, "Patron, your pet spirit beast is hurting others and throwing a tantrum here. Aren't you going to discipline it?" The purple-robed cultivator continued reading the sutra in his hands obliviously without even looking up. Ha 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 ha! The hairy burly man roared in wild laughter. "Stinky monk, you're trying to provoke my master? You really don't know what's good for you." When Su Zimo saw the purple-robed cultivator's nonchalance, he stopped smiling and said calmly, "Patron, since you choose to remain silent, I'm sorry." Instantly, the old temple went silent. It was as though air had gone stale. "I'll discipline it for you." By the time the first word "I'll" was said, Su Zimo had already vanished from the spot. At the second word, discipline, Su Zimo had already arrived in front of the hairy burly man and stomped furiously on the ground, causing the world to quake with a boom. Even Ming Zhan, who was not directly involved, felt his legs wobble and shuddered for a brief moment uncontrollably, let alone the hairy burly man who was facing it directly. It was even worse for the little fox whose fragile and weak body bounced from the ground instantly. The hairy burly man's expression changed. This was way too ferocious. Earlier on, he faced a calm, smiling monk. In the blink of an eye, it was like an ancient demon that was about to devour others. An overwhelming aura shrouded him. The hairy burly man felt his chest go stuffy and was unable to breathe. Although the monk looked shorter than him, he felt like he was trampled by the monk in terms of aura. At the third word Su Zimo extended his massive palm and his flesh expanded, blanketing the skies as it descended. There was a terrifying aura as though all living beings were about to be suppressed by his palm. Although there was no spirit energy, that hand seal was the first form of the demon-subduing seal. It was an innate counter to demon beasts. Ah! The hairy burly man roared in rage and the blood chi in his body rumbled. Baring his menacing fangs, he crossed his muscular arms and propped it upwards in defense. Boom! There was a deafening sound. The aura between the two of them was chaotic. The moment they made contact, the expression of the hairy burly man changed and he felt a terrible pain in his arms, as though they were about to snap. Although Su Zimo was only using one hand, the hairy burly man felt an apocalyptic power surging through like the crush of a tidal wave. It was unstoppable. 4. At that moment, Su Zimo had just said the fourth word. The hairy burly man's inner core circulated wildly and his demonic chi burst forth. All his tendons and bones rang and his fur and flesh expanded rapidly. His body was transforming swiftly as he revealed a menacing expression. Unable to withstand it, the hairy burly man's reaction was extremely fast and he revealed his true form immediately. Although demon beasts could take on human form after they formed a core, they could only release their true strength upon returning to their true form. The rise in combat strength would be at least 30%. It's a Tao Wu! Ming Zhen could not help but exclaim softly in surprise when he saw the hairy burly man's true form. The Tao Wu was one of the primordial ferocious beasts. There were many types of demon beasts and their strength was mostly determined by their bloodlines. Among them, pure-blooded ferocious beasts were the strongest. However, even among pure-blooded ferocious beasts, there were stronger and weaker ones. The Tao Wu was among the strongest and most terrifying of the pure-blooded ferocious beasts with immense strength. In the primordial era, they reigned domineeringly in Tianhuang mainland and were extremely violent. At this phase, the true form of a Tao Wu was at least 100 feet tall. But now against Su Zimo's blanketing palm, the Tao Wu's body looked like it was suppressed by a gigantic mountain and could not grow more than 10 feet. Finally, the Tao Wu panicked. It realized that the difference in strength between the two of them was too great. Even with his true form, he could not fight this monk before him head-on. You! Su Zimo's final word was spoken. Snap! Against the suppression of the terrifying strength, the Tao Wu's arms were crushed by Su Zimo's palm. Su Zimo's palm descended upon the Tao Wu's head and pushed down fiercely. Boom! Su Zimo pushed against the Tao Wu's head and thrust it into the ground. Instantly, a big hole caved into the ground with fresh blood splattering everywhere. The Tao Wu's face was messed up with flesh and blood. I'll discipline it for you. Although the entire process seemed slow right from the moment Su Zimo moved till the Tao Wu's head was buried, in reality, all it took was a single sentence. By the time Su Zimo's final word was spoken, the Tao Wu was already unconscious. 10 years of dormancy. Su Zimo had focused wholeheartedly on Buddhism and his violent streak had diminished significantly while his mental state had turned much calmer. That was the reason why he did not strike directly even after witnessing the Tao Wu bully the little fox and injure Ming Zhen. However, he was Su Zimo after all. Decisive to kill. Since he was going to attack, he was definitely not going to hesitate. He suppressed with a thunderous might that could not be resisted. He was an unparalleled saber with extreme edge. The moment he was unsheathed, a hole would be punctured through the firmaments. Chapter 610, Might of the Visual Technique. Chapter 610, Might of the Visual Technique. He's not dead yet? Su Zimo frowned when he sensed life from within the Tao Wu's body after thrusting the latter's head into the ground. This ferocious beast was truly frightening. Notwithstanding its tremendous strength, even its body was extremely tough. Despite the impact where even its face was contorted, it was still not dead. Su Zimo remained silent and exerted strength in his fingers with the intention of crushing the Tao Wu's head. All of a sudden, a sense of danger rang in Su Zimo's mind. He felt an extremely dangerous aura. Su Zimo turned around instinctively. Not far away, the purple-robed cultivator had already raised his head and was glaring at him intently. The purple-robed cultivator's expression was cold and there was an icy intent in his gaze. The purple-robed cultivator had not moved at all. With one hand behind his back, he held up the mystic Dermic Lotus Sutra with his other hand and did not seem like he intended to attack. However, Su Zimo felt chills run down his spine. The purple-robed cultivator's pupils were constricting. Initially, the constriction of one's pupils was a natural instinct. No matter the race, when one was agitated, terrified or hostile, their pupils would constrict. However, a normal constriction would cause the round pupil to shrink until it became a hole the size of a needle. Yet, the purple-robed cultivator's pupils seemed like they were round moons being devoured. The entire process resembled an eclipse. Eventually, 2 crescent moons were sinisterly reflected in the purple-robed cultivator's eyes. When he saw those pupils, Ming Zhan's expression changed starkly. 2 words flashed through Su Zimo's mind: Eclipse Eye. Eclipse Eye was one of the most notorious visual techniques of the cultivation world and had roots that traced back to the primordial era. Although this visual technique was extremely strong, its cultivation process was also extremely dangerous. Throughout history, only a rare few, less than 1 in 10,000 people, managed to cultivate it successfully. Most of the others cultivated themselves into blindness. Now, even if any cultivators came across the cultivation technique of Eclipse Eye by accident, they wouldn't dare to cultivate it either. To think that this purple-robed cultivator would have cultivated that visual technique. To begin with, there were few people who could cultivate visual techniques. There were even less that could cultivate Eclipse Eye. Not only must they be peerless paragons, they must even possess immense confidence in themselves. When he noticed the changes in the purple-robed cultivator's pupils, Su Zimo realized that this was definitely not a weakling in Tianhuang mainland. 2 cold beams of light streaked through the purple-robed cultivator's eyes. The next moment, his pupils returned to normal. However, those 2 beams of light arrived before Su Zimo swiftly and silently, like 2 extremely sharp crescent sabers. To Ming Zhan and the little fox. It looked like the void between Su Zimo and the purple-robed cultivator was a silk cloth that was sliced by the 2 cold beams of light. The temperature of the entire courtyard dipped massively. "Watch out!" Ming Zhan only had enough time to exclaim. All of a sudden, a change happened. A bedazzling radiance burst forth in that eerie courtyard that was shrouded by the night skies. It was as though a blazing sun had descended here with a blinding shine. Illumination Eye. Su Zimo's right eye was white as jade without any impurities. The light that was released from his right eye illuminated the old temple like daylight. Suddenly, a burning column of light burst forth from Su Zimo's right eye, and collided fiercely against the 2 cold incoming beams of light. Although the 2 vastly different energies collided, it was silent. The spirit energy between the both of them evaporated into thin air completely. In Ming Zhan and the little fox's eyes, it was as though the void between Su Zimo and the purple-robed cultivator had distorted and was collapsing. The might released by 2 top-tier visual techniques caused everyone's visions to be impacted severely. Thud, thud, thud. Su Zimo staggered 3 steps in retreat and the light in his right eye dissipated. Eventually, he was at the losing end of this visual technique fight. Even so, he was not injured. When a cold wave penetrated his right eye, it was diffused by the illumination stone right away. Su Zimo was rather calm. However, the purple-robed cultivator was shocked. He did not know what visual technique this monk had cultivated such that it could go against his Eclipse Eye. He had cultivated Eclipse Eye for more than 100 years. Yet, how old was this gray-robed monk before him? He looked to be younger than 40. Even if this person had cultivated the visual technique when he was in his mother's womb, it would only be less than 50 years at most. However, with the 40-years-old visual technique, the other party merely stumbled back 3 steps after a head-on collision with his eclipse eye that he had cultivated for more than 100 years. There was something even more bizarre. He could not sense any spirit energy within the gray-robed monk's body. What was the background of that gray-robed monk? The gleam in the purple-robed cultivator's eyes intensified with a joy that resembled the way a predator watched its prey. In a flash, the purple-robed cultivator had already arrived before Su Zimo. It was too fast. His speed burst had already surpassed the limits of Su Zimo's visual capabilities. How strong! With no time to think, Su Zimo took a deep breath of air and chanted Sanskrit. Om! The void trembled and the sound reverberated through the world. The purple-robed cultivator's figure paused for a moment as his ears twitched and closed in towards his face creepily. It was equivalent to muting the outside world. He had decreased the impact of the damning mantra to its lowest. Upon noticing that, Su Zimo squinted with a grim expression. This purple-robed cultivator was much scarier than he had imagined. Even though it was just a simple act, Su Zimo knew clearly in his heart that it was extremely difficult to do it. It was a sign that he had complete mastery over every single fiber of muscle on his body. Splash! The purple-robed cultivator's bloodline surged with the sound of a tsunami. Tsunami blood. This purple-robed cultivator had also cultivated to the realm of tsunami blood. At that moment, Su Zimo turned calm instead. When he saw that the purple-robed cultivator could shut his ears at will, he had already guessed that this man may have cultivated to the tsunami blood realm. The purple-robed cultivator had a domineering aura and swung his arms like a steel whip, crushing down onto Su Zimo's head viciously. An evil gust of wind howled. A tragic aura shrouded the air. Splash! Su Zimo's body echoed with the same sound of tsunami. In the eyes of Ming Zhan and the little fox, the fight between these two was like a collision between 2 oceans where each threatened to devour the other. Their bloodlines were way too terrifying. Su Zimo's body bent over and one of his knees seemed to buckle as he propped up both hands. It looked like he was bowing down in submission to the purple-robed cultivator and delivering an immortal fruit. Compared to the descent of the purple-robed cultivator's steel whip, Su Zimo's stance looked ordinary without any aura. However, the purple-robed cultivator's expression changed starkly. He had sensed an immense killing intent. Bang! His right arm collided against Su Zimo's palms. The collision of their flesh did not have any shockwave. Instead, it was dull and solid. Prior to this, any cultivator that met with this attack would be severely injured with their bones and tendons snapped even if they did not die. But now, not only has the purple-robed cultivator failed to suppress Su Zimo with that slam, he even felt his arm being repelled with a massive opening revealed at his chest area. Chapter 611. World-Cleansing Green Lotus. Chapter 611. World-Cleansing Green Lotus. For most cultivators, that was an almost instantaneous opening that was difficult for them to capitalize on. However, the purple-robed cultivator's opponent was Su Zimo. With a killing move from the mystic classic of the 12 demon kings of the Great Wilderness, he flung away the purple-robed cultivator's arm. Su Zimo's motion did not stop at all, and that initially bent-over body of his spread open all of a sudden. Crackle! His tendons moved and his bones shook. Boom! His foot stomped heavily on the ground, causing the earth to quake. With the repulsion force, Su Zimo reached out with a pair of defined arms with muscles that were knotted together with a metallic luster. His fingers opened up and he reached out for the purple-robed cultivator's shoulders. At the same time, Su Zimo buckled his knees and thrust. His entire body was like a divine steed that was galloping over with a ferocious momentum. After Sanguine Ape Fruit offering, he made use of the rebound strength of his body as well as the flexibility of his tendons to release Plow Heaven's stride and shift the momentum to his side to follow up with Divine Steed Dismemberment. The entire process was fluid as water without any sluggishness. Instantly, an extremely tragic aura was released with that charge. Even if a pure-blooded ferocious beast stood in his way, Su Zimo would be able to ram it into pieces. Divine Steed Dismemberment was the most brutal stance of the mystic classic of the 12 demon kings of the Great Wilderness. Apart from that ram, Su Zimo's arms were also executing another killing move. If he managed to lock onto the purple-robed cultivator's shoulders, they would be ripped off immediately. Initially, the purple-robed cultivator had the advantage. However, after Su Zimo's sanguine ape fruit offering was defended, he revealed an opening that caused the tables to turn. The purple-robed cultivator's expression changed slightly at the sight of Su Zimo charging over. He gripped his fists and the joint of his middle finger protruded slightly as he thrust towards Su Zimo's palms. At the same time, the purple-robed cultivator leaned back and raised his feet to defend against Su Zimo's knee. Piak! Piak! Their fists and palms met and they shuddered. Bang! Immediately after, Su Zimo's knee rammed against the purple-robed cultivator's foot viciously. The purple-robed cultivator fell backwards with a momentum with a light motion as though he was floating, gliding slowly to the back. The toughness of divine steed dismemberment was countered by the purple-robed cultivator's gentleness. Up till this point of his cultivation, Su Zimo had been in countless battles. However, he had never encountered anyone who could match him in melee combat. The purple-robed cultivator before him was the first. The purple-robed cultivator floated in midair and after a slight pause, he lunged forward once more with a killing intent in his eyes. Boom! The purple-robed cultivator threw a punch. A resounding bang echoed in the air. The purple-robed cultivator's black hair spread apart and his eyes shone brightly, as though he was about to fuse with the environment. That punch possessed the force of the universe and was invincible. Splash! Su Zimo did not avoid or retreat and allowed his bloodline to rumble within his body. His momentum had already climbed to its peak. Melee combat was the most dangerous. A single mistake could lead to death on the spot. Even against that seemingly invincible punch of the purple-robed cultivator, Su Zimo did not choose to retreat and the fierceness in his eyes flashed with a soaring battle intent. Ha! Su Zimo started with a roar and strode forward against the tremendous pressure. As he swung his arm, the green veins on it pulsated and his fist expanded to twice its size. His fist was like a gigantic green-black seal that was descending from the skies. Both their gazes were resolute and unshakable. Boom! Their fists collided against one another. The entire void went still. Ming Zhan and the little fox heard a jarring sound in their ears. Both men had fractures in their fists. Both parties suffered losses. The purple-robed cultivator narrowed his eyes with the flames of rage burning in them. In all these years, there had never been another cultivator of the same realm who could injure him. He hadn't expected himself to get injured in this dilapidated and unassuming old temple. Su Zimo was expressionless. He had not expected to suppress the purple-robed cultivator with that punch to begin with. After the punch, Su Zimo's palm went soft as though it had no strength and landed on the purple-robed cultivator's arm like a flexible bull's tongue. The purple-robed cultivator was alarmed and felt his scalp prickle. Boom! Without thinking twice, the spirit energy within his body surged and converged into his arm. Su Zimo's palm coiled, trembled and yanked. Shing! The purple-robed cultivator's robes were torn entirely, turning into pieces of cloth that floated in midair. Both of them repelled instantly upon contact. Although the purple-robed cultivator's arm was perfectly fine, it trembled slightly as though it had endured a massive impact. Fortunately, he had reacted fast enough and channeled both his bloodline and spirit energy. Otherwise, his arm would have very likely been snapped with that attack. Courting. Death. The purple-robed cultivator's expression darkened instantly as he glared at Su Zimo, saying slowly. His entire aura changed all of a sudden and a shuddering energy shockwave surrounded him. It was a golden core phenomenon. Although Su Zimo had no spirit energy, he was extremely sharp towards the power of phenomenons. It was clear that the purple-robed cultivator no longer wanted to waste time with Su Zimo after suffering a slight loss. He was prepared to use his golden core phenomenon to kill the latter. Su Zimo had a calm expression. If the purple-robed cultivator released his golden core phenomenon, it would mean that there was no way to return and the two of them were going to fight to their deaths. At that time, he would not require any reservations and would circulate his inner core to fight with his demon form. Su Zimo's combat strength would increase in his demon form. However, even then, he was not confident that he would be able to suppress this purple-robed cultivator. This person's golden core phenomenon was frightening and could very well exceed his imagination. Junior brother, don't fret. I'll help you. Right then, Ming Zhan braved the mighty force field between the two of them and arrived beside Su Zimo. His eyes were clear and a terrifying energy fluctuation shrouded him as well. Ming Zhan knew about Su Zimo's dantian and knew that the latter couldn't conjure a golden core phenomenon because he had no spirit energy. As such, he rushed over, intending to help Su Zimo defend against the golden core phenomenon of the purple-robed cultivator. The purple-robed cultivator's gaze shone brightly as he focused his attention on Ming Zhan. Su Zimo glanced slightly sideways as well. A pristine jade flower bud appeared behind Ming Zhan, pure, flawless and dotted with dew. The flower bud swayed gently with a mysterious glow that purged away the darkness as though it could cleanse every single bit of evil in this world. The green flower bud was going to blossom at any moment. World-cleansing green lotus. The legendary and lost world-cleansing green lotus was actually at the bottom of the Dragon Burial Valley and was now coming from this unassuming little monk. Before the world-cleansing green lotus was lost, it was ranked relatively high on the phenomenon ranking. The ancient green lotus swayed with a bright glow and could cleanse all the sins in the world. This was a top 10 ranking phenomenon. In reality, be it in terms of cultivation realm, mastery of spirit arts and secret skills or strength, Ming Zhan was not weak. In fact, he was much stronger than most of the paragons that Su Zimo had seen before. However, what Ming Zhan lacked was the experience of engaging a powerful foe in a death bout. He spent his days cultivating at the bottom of the valley, isolated from the rest of the world, and did not have the chance to fight with others, let alone experience the brink of death. The combat strength that was commonly referred to was in reality not the actual strength of the cultivator, but the amount of strength they could produce. If someone could only unleash 30% of his actual strength, his combat strength would also merely just be 30%. In reality, Ming Zhan's strength was enough to suppress the Tao Wu. However, he was the one injured in the fight against the Tao Wu. This was the reason behind it. Chapter 612, Di-Inj. Chapter 612, Di-In. Amitba. The doors of the Grand Hall were pushed open, accompanied by a Buddhist proclamation as an old monk with long brows that fell from both sides of his face walked forth. He had hazy eyes and said gently, Ming Zhen, these are guests from afar. Remove your phenomenon. Ming Zhen nodded. The ferociousness in Su Zimo's eyes faded as well. Since the old monk had shown himself, both of them were not going to fight anymore. The old monk turned his sights towards the purple-robed cultivator. Patron, although you are our guest, you've got to be orderly. You are free to browse through the sutras here. However, if you insist on fighting, I'll have to invite you to leave. The implications of his sentence were heavy. In other words, he was warning the purple-robed cultivator to behave himself. Given the seniority of the old monk, there was naturally no way he would lay his hands on the purple-robed cultivator. However, if the purple-robed cultivator went overboard, the old monk would not hesitate to have him leave as well. The purple-robed cultivator sneered, Reverend, it's fine if you want to protect these two disciples of yours. However, I've got something to ask you. Can you protect them for the rest of their lives? This man injured my spirit beast. The purple-robed cultivator pointed to Su Zimo, who was not far away, with a cold expression and said coolly, You can protect him today. However, I'd advise you to keep him in the valley. He had better spend his entire life hiding at the bottom of this Dragon Burial Valley. If I come across him outside, I'll have him hand over his head. The fact that the purple-robed cultivator made this remark in the face of the old monk was proof of his confidence. The old monk remained silent. Ming Zhan could not hold it in and refuted. Your spirit beast was the one that provoked us first and wanted to take the little fox away. How can you be so self-righteous when you were the one in the wrong? Aren't you unreasonable? You want to talk about reason? The purple-robed cultivator sneered once more. Little monk, your naive attitude is sure interesting. This is a world where the strongest survive. If you aren't strong enough, you deserve to be killed. That's the simplest reason ever. Although Ming Zhan could not understand those words, Su Zimo could. Strictly speaking, that was indeed the cruelty of the cultivation world. Given Ming Zhan's current state, even with his capabilities, he won't be able to survive long upon leaving the Dragon Burial Valley. Oh right. As though he suddenly recalled something, the purple-robed cultivator looked at Su Zimo and smiled faintly. The intermediate ancient battlefield is going to open up in 10 years' time. Don't ever head there, or you're going to die inside. Su Zimo's expression was indifferent. He did not care about the purple-robed cultivator's threat at all. At this moment, he was not confident of suppressing the purple-robed cultivator even if he was in his demon form. However, Su Zimo firmly believed that he would become even scarier 10 years later. He would have been dormant for 20 years by then. He was convinced that nobody would be able to stop him the moment he stepped out of the bottom of the Dragon Burial Valley. Not even this purple-robed cultivator before him could stop him. Due to the appearance of the old monk, even though there was still hostility between the purple-robed cultivator and Su Zimo, there were no longer any clashes. The purple-robed cultivator had a lot of elixirs with him. Within a couple of days, he saved the Tao Wu whose life was hanging on a thread. After the Tao Wu woke up, the way it looked at Su Zimo changed. There was a hint of avoidance and fear in its eyes. For the following month, the purple-robed cultivator did not leave. He merely browsed through the mystic Dermic Lotus Sutra day and night. After a month, he rose and brought the Tao Wu along with him to leave the old temple. At the same time, the old monk approached Su Zimo. He was direct and got straight to the point. Are you intending to enter the ancient battlefield 10 years later? Yes. Su Zimo nodded and did not lie. Given his cultivation realm, and under the circumstances where he wanted to take his elder brother, Su Hong, with him to leave the North region, that was the best solution. The old monk continued, all right, I'll make a move personally to open up a teleportation spot to the ancient battlefield 10 years later to send you and Ming Zhan in. It required the combined strength of 5 void reversions to open up a teleportation spot to the elementary ancient battlefield. The temporal space in the intermediate ancient battlefield was much stabler. To open up a connection point, the required strength would be greater and one had to be at least a Dharma characteristic. Senior brother Ming Zhan. Su Zimo frowned and hesitated to speak. Although Ming Zhan was not weak, he had way too little experience in combat techniques. The ancient battlefield was filled with bloodshed and massacres and was even crueler than the cultivation world. There was a high chance that Ming Zhan might die if he entered the ancient battlefield. The old monk could tell of Su Zimo's worries. Therefore, I want you to help him. There's still 10 more years. Try and think of a way to help him grow as quickly as possible. Suddenly, Su Zimo recalled how Dai Yu cast him into the Zhonglang mountain range and could not help but smile. It's simple. Su Zimo said, we'll cast him into the depths of the palace and fight to his limits with the otherworldly soldiers under the pretext that he must not use his golden core phenomenon. A true growth will only be achieved through a life and death experience. The both of them chatted for a little more and the old monk instructed, if you encounter that purple-robed cultivator in the ancient battlefield, you must be careful and try your best to avoid him. Su Zimo frowned and could not help but ask, just who is he exactly? He's the #1 paragon of Chaos Essence sect and is undefeated across the same realm. The old monk said, it said that he was already invincible through the Golden Core realm when he was in his 30s. If things go smoothly, he will definitely be a titular disciple once he reaches Void Reversion realm. What's his name? Su Zimo asked again. Dean. The old monk replied. Su Zimo raised his brow. It was a strange name that he seemed to have heard before. After pondering for a moment, Su Zimo's eyes flashed as he said word by word. The #1 perfected being of Tianhuang mainland who cultivated the Chaos Ocean. Dean. That's right. The old monk nodded. 100 years ago, that lad relied on Chaos Ocean to overwhelm all his foes in the ancient battlefield and arrive at the top of the phenomenon ranking. It was no wonder. Su Zimo heaved a long sigh of relief. That was the reason why this person could fight him to such an extent in melee combat. It was because he was the #1 perfected being of Tianhuang mainland, who had managed to cultivate the golden core phenomenon of the human emperor's legacy, Chaos Ocean. Curiously, Su Zimo asked again, since he's already at the top of the phenomenon ranking, why is he still going to enter the ancient battlefield 10 years later? A rough calculation would put Di Yin's age at around 130 years old. The old monk explained, against the 500 years lifespan of golden cores, he's considered young in his hundreds. As long as his lifespan allows and the timing is right, he can enter the ancient battlefield. After all, there are way too many treasures and opportunities inside which have all been passed down from the ancient era. After pondering for a moment, Su Zimo asked again. He was already the number one of the phenomenon ranking 100 years ago. Why does he still choose to remain in the golden core realm? That's the frightening aspect of this lad. The old monk said, there's nothing much to continuous breakthroughs. If one can pause in their tracks at a certain juncture to consolidate their past, they will be able to truly solidify their foundation and reach the true realm of harmony by becoming one with the universe. He was already the number one perfected being of Tianhuang mainland 100 years ago. I'm sure nobody is going to be his match 100 years later. If you encounter him once more, you must be extremely cautious. Chapter 613, Heartache. Chapter 613, Heartache. The bottom of the Dragon Burial Valley was isolated from the outside world. Day in and out, the old temple sat there silently, distant and dilapidated. It seemed like there was nothing different about it than before. The only difference was that there was now another young monk with refined features. There was also another quirky little fox. Each morning, the young monk would gaze at the rising sun. At dusk, he would gaze at the setting sun. It was the same every day without any breaks in between. The eyes of the young monk turned increasingly brighter. Of course, for the most part of the day, the young monk would choose to browse through sutras and comprehend Zen and the Tao in the sutra chamber. Against a green lantern and ancient Buddha statue, he sat on a praying mat with a sutra gently propped on his hand with a calm expression and in a tranquil state. Beside him, a red little fox squatted quietly without moving. At night, the young monk would head to the backyard of the old temple. In the eerie cemetery, the sounds of dragons, tigers and endless beasts roaring would sound till daybreak before subsiding. Day after day, year after year. In the blink of an eye, 20 years passed. Time did not seem to leave any scars on the monk's face. However, his dantian was still empty without a trickle of spirit energy. After all these years, the young monk no longer tried to cultivate intentionally. Instead, he recited sutras and strolled every day in a leisurely manner. As time passed by, he gained a unique aura around him. It was indescribable. It was as though the young monk had reached the realm of fusing with nature. He looked like an extremely ordinary monk at a single glance. However, upon closer inspection, he was like an unsolvable mystery. Yet another night passed. Cemetery in the backyard of the old temple. At dawn, the young monk opened his eyes slowly and tidied his attire. Bowing to a red-headed burly man not far before him, he said, "Thank you for your care for more than 20 years. Naturally, the young monk was Su Zimo. In all these years, this was the first time Su Zimo had spoken to the red-headed ghost in such a proper manner as well as thanked the latter with such courtesy. Sensing something, the red-headed ghost raised his brow and asked, "You're going to leave?" "Yes." Su Zimo nodded. "Yes." The red-headed ghost replied distractedly. When Su Zimo's figure was about to vanish from the backyard, the voice of the red-headed ghost sounded once more. "Be careful out there." Touched, Su Zimo nodded his head. It was still early. Ming Zhen was still asleep. The doors of the grand hall were tightly shut and the old monk was not out. Su Zimo intended to wait a little more outside. Suddenly, his ears twitched and he heard intermittent calls. "Great! Great monk!" The voice came from outside the old temple above the Dragon Burial Valley. The only person who would call him that was Descendant G. For some reason, Su Zimo felt his heart palpitate, as though he could sense that something big was about to happen. In his past 20 years of studying Buddhism and Zen, he had never experienced such emotional fluctuation. Su Zimo pushed the doors open and meandered forward with the valley. Before long, Descendant G's voice sounded once more. "Great monk, where are you? Hurry and come out, mister. Su's not going to make it." Su Zimo's footsteps came to a gradual stop. He froze on the spot with a lost gaze as his mouth dropped agape slightly. There was only a single sentence repeating itself in his mind. Mr. Su's not going to make it. Brother. Su Zimo murmured. His first reaction was disbelief. How was that possible? Even after 20 years, Su Hong was only now in his 60s. How was this possible? However, the next moment, Su Zimo realized that even though Demoness Ji loved to joke, there was no way she would lie about something like this. His elder brother was truly not going to make it. More than 10 years ago, Ji Yaoxue had already mentioned that Su Hong was not in a good condition. That was the reason why Su Zimo decided that he was going to take Su Hong with him to leave the North region after the intermediate ancient battlefield opened up. To think that, after 20 years of studying the Tao of Buddhism and Zen, Su Zimo had initially thought that he had already let go of many things including life and death. To think that the instant he heard this piece of news, his heart felt a piercing pain. It was extremely, extremely painful. At the bottom of the Dragon Burial Valley, Su Zimo leaned against the ice-cold wall of the cliff and slid down weakly to the ground. There was an indescribable misery flooding in the depths of his eyes. In a flash, Su Zimo recalled many things. He recalled the rivers of blood and mountains of corpses on that night dozens of years ago in the house of Lord Wooding in Yen country. A young man less than 20 years old protected 2 young children, and escaped from the capital with all his might relying only on his guts. Although there was a savage slash on his face that nearly cut his head into 2, the young man did not care at all. After dozens of years, the 2 young children had already grown up. As for that young man of the past, he gradually turned old instead. He had already gained a lot of white hair by the time he was in his 30s. That initially upright body of his had curved significantly as well. With his firm shoulders, that young man carried the burden of everything and protected the 2 young children, allowing them to enjoy a peaceful and beautiful life. It was the same way he had charged out of the capital with them under his lead more than 10 years ago. He feared nothing. The young man of the past reigned the world with his sword. More than 10 years later, his sword no longer had that edge and he was much more restrained and mature. The only thing that did not change was his heart that cared for the world and worried for his citizens. That was the reason why he could stand forth and lead 5,000 black-armored cavalry to hold off Luo Tianwu and gang who were massacring the citizens of Yen country outside Jianan City, even when he had not recovered fully from his injuries. That was the reason why he could make that shocking statement. The Su family may have a family feud with the king of Yen, but your army raids the land of the country of Yen, intruding our borders and territory, slaughtering our people. This is national enmity. Family feud and national enmity are different. Su Zimo's sight gradually turned blurry. However, all those scenes flashed through his mind clear as day. Heis! A tragic sigh sounded from above the Dragon Burial Valley. 20 years ago, Glass Palace massacred 13 cities of Yen country just to vent their frustrations. The blow of that was way too great for Mr. Su. For the past 20 years, although he had been in the capital, Mr. Su's mind has always been worrying about the citizens of Yen country. He's truly a great ruler. His worries had turned into illness. Even cultivators would suffer a reduced lifespan and enter chi deviation if they spent dozens of years worrying, let alone ordinary mortals. Great monk, I don't know if you're listening. Demoness Ji's voice sounded once more. For the past few years, my sister and I have searched for many spirit herbs in the cultivation world but none of them worked. Mr. Su's health continued declining. For the past few months, Mr. Su would always talk in his sleep and call out for you and Xiaoning. When I hear them I truly feel. Demoness Ji choked and could not continue. Su Zimo covered his head with his arms and curled up. He could no longer control himself and broke out into a miserable cry. Unknowingly, Ming Zhan and the little fox had arrived by his side. The little fox felt her heart wrench at the sight of Su Zimo and closed in, rubbing her head gently against his ankle and whimpering to console him. Ming Zhan lowered his head in silence as well, reciting Buddhist proclamations in his heart. Chapter 614, Once the Fog Fades. Chapter 614. Once the fog fades. Backyard of the old temple. The old monk and red-headed ghost gazed into the distance, as though their gazes could pass through the voids and look at the young monk who was bawling his heart out. The both of them exchanged glances. "Heis." The old monk sighed. The red-headed ghost remarked sorrowfully. This was a day that he was going to have to face sooner or later. "It's for the best." "Who is the judge as to whether or not it's for the best?" The old monk shook his head. "Old monk, what do you mean?" The red-headed ghost could tell that the old monk was implying something. The old monk replied, "This lad is sentimental, and for him, Mr. Su is an anchor." This was the anchor that caused him to shave to become a monk, to clear his mind and to stay here quietly at the bottom of the Dragon Burial Valley for a full 20 years. The red-headed ghost nodded. The old monk was not wrong. Given Su Zimo's character, there was no way he was going to endure things even if he had offended Glass Palace and the factions of the entire North region. Did he really not have any other method of leaving the North region? If Su Zimo wasn't waiting for an opportunity to leave the North region with Su Hong, given his character, he would have killed his way out more than 10 years ago the moment his inner core had recovered. The old monk sighed. Now that the anchor is gone, there's a chance that the nightmare of the paragons of the immortal Buddhist and fiend sects, that strongest monster incarnate of history that struck endless fear in the hearts of countless cultivators, is about to return. The red-headed ghost squinted and asked, "Have you noticed something?" "I don't know." The old monk shook his head. The red-headed ghost asked again. More than 20 years have passed and there's still no feedback from his golden core. Is there any chance of recovery at all? "I don't know." The old monk shook his head still. After pausing briefly, he said slowly, "Perhaps he's already found a method of recovering his golden core, perhaps not. I don't know. I can no longer read him." The red-headed ghost's expression changed. Even the old monk could not read Su Zimo any longer. After 20 years of studying Buddhism and Zen, Su Zimo had indeed gained an additional unique aura. He was almost like Buddha. The red-headed ghost's expression changed as he suddenly said, "He's back. I guess he's here to bid you farewell. Also, you're his master at the end of the day. Give him a few items that can help him protect himself. Don't keep everything to yourself. Do you want to take them with you into the grave?" The red-headed ghost mumbled, but the old monk had already turned to leave. He disappeared from the cemetery in the blink of an eye, and had already returned to the grand hall. Not long after, Su Zimo pushed the doors open and walked in. He seemed composed on the surface, but he could not conceal the sorrow deep in his eyes. Su Zimo walked straight into the grand hall and knelt down in the direction of the old monk. He kowtowed 3 times before saying softly, "Master, I'm going to leave." "Go on." The old monk did not ask him to stay. He knew that it would be a futile attempt. Reaching out, the old monk handed over 2 battered talismans in his palms. These are 2 transference talismans. One of them is the minor transference talisman and the other, the major transference talisman. I won't elaborate more on the minor transference talisman, it's a random teleportation. As for the major transference talisman, it was a treasure that was crafted on the behest of the emperor of the Great Qian Empire in the past. It can even cross a major region at its furthest, and the teleportation can be targeted. Targeted teleportation. Those words carried way too much weight. The minor transference talisman was already precious enough. And yet, the major transference talisman even had targeted teleportation. It was equivalent to an additional life for Su Zimo. Su Zimo received it with both hands and placed it into his storage bag. Right as he was about to turn and leave, the old monk called him back. The old monk gazed at Su Zimo's empty dantian and his eyes flashed with worry and curiosity. After a moment of hesitation, he still decided on asking, "Your golden core?" Su Zimo remained silent. A moment later he said softly, "Actually, the secret to recovering the golden core lies in the Siraka flower." Siraka flower? The old monk was briefly stunned. Although the Siraka flower was an item of the old temple, it was snatched over by the red-robed woman many years ago and was now in Su Zimo's dantian. Su Zimo said, "In an ancient sutra in the sutra chamber, there's a legend saying that the Ashoka tree is one of the 3 sacred trees of Buddhism. The Buddha that created the Tao of Buddhism was also born right under the Ashoka tree." "I've heard of that legend before." Suddenly, the old monk's voice paused. A thought flashed through his mind. He finally understood the correlation between the Sriracha flower and the recovery of Su Zimo's golden core. According to the legend, the Sriracha flower possessed another sort of energy apart from fire. The energy of life. It was the birth of life. The creation of something from emptiness. The Sriracha flower had witnessed the scene of the Buddha's birth. Su Zimo's dantian was shattered and his golden core was destroyed. However, the power of his golden core did not vanish. It was merely absorbed by the Sriracha flower in the depths of his dantian. For the past 20 years, Su Zimo spent his days studying Buddhism and comprehending the Tao so that he could accumulate and consolidate the power to trigger that life within the Sriracha flower consistently. Su Zimo was already walking out of the old temple. In a flash, black hair grew from Su Zimo's bald head, turning longer by the moment. Within his body, in that originally dark and hollow dantian, a flower bloomed. On the flower, there was a fruit that grew at a speed visible to the naked eye. It was golden, round and shone with a bedazzling aura. That fruit was Su Zimo's brand new golden core. Spirit energy reverberated through his dantian, turning richer and fiercer by the moment. It was as though a cyclone was forming in his body. Su Zimo's aura was turning stronger by the moment. With every step he took, the spirit energy in his dantian would increase by a fraction. It was turning increasingly stronger. Boom! In the blink of an eye, the spirit energy in his dantian had already broken through the limits of early-stage golden core and arrived at mid-stage golden core. Not long after. Boom! There was another bang. Late-stage golden core. The energy that Su Zimo once gained from consuming the 10,000-year vermilion fruit had not gone to waste. Everything was absorbed by the Sriracha flower and was being produced right now. With every step that he took, Su Zimo's aura would change by a fraction. The only things that did not change were his eyes. They were neither sad nor joyful and had no fluctuations. By the time Su Zimo arrived at the entrance of the old temple, his aura was close to stabilizing and his black hair danced wildly with a frightening aura that resembled a divine being. Peak of late-stage golden core. He had persevered through it. He had been dormant for 20 years at the bottom of the Dragon Burial Valley studying Buddhism. However, instead of decreasing, his cultivation realm had advanced to the peak of late-stage golden core. Of course, that was not the only change in Su Zimo. There was something that no one could describe. Standing at the entrance of the old temple, Su Zimo turned around slowly and gazed at the sentence etched on the wall of the grand hall with a lost look in his clear eyes. Those were the words that Dai Yu had left him. Suddenly, Su Zimo extended his finger. A stream of spirit chi burst forth from his forefinger like a sharp sword that sliced the wall of the grand hall. Su Zimo waved his arm. He left another statement right after the statement on the wall. It was a sharp statement that looked down on the entire world. Instinctively, Ming Zhan recited it. Once the fog fades, the radiance shall illuminate through the entire world. Pest! His confidence. There was a hint of shock deep in the eyes of the old monk. The sound of chains rattling echoed suddenly from the backyard that was initially silent. To become one of the greatest, you have to work on the foundation and be willing to take hardship and serve others. Once the fog fades, the radiance shall illuminate through the entire world. The first statement was left behind by Dai Yu. The second statement was Su Zimo's reply. Chapter 615, Return. Chapter 615, Return. Swash! A white streak of light tore through the backyard of the old temple. It descended in the courtyard, flawless and magnificent as the full moon up in the skies. Moon concealment bow. Su Zimo received it and brushed his hand on it gently. The sixth spirit pattern that was not fully formed previously was not clearer than ever. A connate spirit weapon. After consuming the essence of the sun and moon for 15 years at the bottom of the Dragon Burial Valley, the moon concealment bow had evolved into a connate spirit weapon. Su Zimo put the moon concealment bow away in his storage bag with a calm expression. Incoming saber. A voice sounded in Su Zimo's mind. Before that statement was completed, the sound of metal clashing echoed from the backyard and reverberated through the entire world. It buzzed and emanated a murderous aura that caused the temperature of the entire old temple to dip. Bloodquencher had appeared. A blood beam surged into the skies and hovered in midair, shining with the glow of 6 spirit patterns. The most beguiling thing was that the 6th spirit pattern was in the color of blood. The connate spirit pattern had dyed the glow surrounding Bloodquencher scarlet. The saber emitted a strong blood stench that was shuddering. As the red-headed ghost had expected, Bloodquencher had indeed gone through a shocking transformation after it was buried in the cemetery and soaked in the blood of peerless experts from 10,000 years ago. Aside from the innate sharpness of a connate spirit weapon, Bloodquencher's ferocity was torrential. The blood beam and stench released from its blade could even affect cultivators mentally. Because the little fox's cultivation realm was inadequate, she felt chills run down her spine just glancing at it. It was as though a grisly hell sprawled with corpses and soaked with blood had appeared before her. Shuddering, she closed her eyes hurriedly. Ming Xian's expression changed slightly as well as he chanted Buddhist proclamations softly to compose himself. Ooh! Suddenly, Bloodquencher bolted toward Su Zimo with a murderous aura at an extremely fast speed. It vibrated in a chilling manner in midair. More than 10 years ago, the red-headed ghost had said it. Once Bloodquencher evolved to become a connate spirit weapon, it would definitely turn incomparably ferocious. Most ferocious weapons slewed their own masters. The stronger something was, the harder it would be to subdue it. Su Zimo did not move at all with his hands behind his back. His gaze was deep as he looked at Bloodquencher that was streaking towards him with a calm expression. It was as though he had no intention of striking. For some unknown reason, Bloodquencher got slower the closer it approached Su Zimo, as though it had fallen into a swamp. The eyes of Ming Zhan and the little fox widened. The blade was less than an inch away from Su Zimo's glabella. Its sharpness seemed to have made contact with Su Zimo's skin. However, Su Zimo was motionless. There were no emotions in his eyes at all. Suddenly, Ming Zhan felt a deep sense of fear when he looked at those deep and emotionless eyes. After laying dormant at the bottom of the Dragon Burial Valley for 20 years, Su Zimo was like a dormant volcano. The moment news of his sick kin arrived, the dormant volcano had already awoken. Although it was calm right now, anyone that provoked this volcano would definitely send forth a destructive stream of lava that would drown all living beings and incinerate everything. Ming Zhan exclaimed softly. Bloodquencher was quivering. It was as though that ferocious item had sensed something too. It was feeling fearful. By nature, it was bloodthirsty and loved to kill. If it could kill its master and devour his blood, it could turn even stronger. But now, it could vaguely sense that if it actually made contact, the seemingly refined man before him would definitely destroy it personally. It did not dare to move. There was a momentary silence. Gradually, Bloodquencher lowered its tip and lowered itself horizontally before Su Zimo. Its sharpness faced outwards and its handle pointed to Su Zimo and was within reach. It had submitted. The ferocious item had just been born and yet, it was shocked into submission immediately. Right from the beginning, Su Zimo had not moved at all. He did not even bat his eyelids. Su Zimo received Bloodquencher and put it away in his storage bag. Including his coiling dragon seal and black gold arrows from before, together with moon concealment bow and Bloodquencher, he now had 4 connate spirit weapons in his possession. When the little fox saw that Su Zimo was about to leave, she moved and wanted to follow him. Wait here for meal. Su Zimo glanced at the little fox and said calmly. Before his sentence was even complete, he had already pushed the doors open and left. The little fox's eyes dimmed with a disappointed look. Ming Zhan said softly, "Don't worry, little fox. Since Junior Brother said that, he'll definitely return." The little fox nodded, but there was still a deep hint of worry in her eyes. In the grand hall, the old monk gazed at the sentences on the wall for a long time in silence. It's rare, truly rare. A long while later, he finally heaved out a deep breath and lamented. To begin with, that red-robed woman was an existence who could look down on the entire Tianhuang mainland. It's only logical that she would leave such daring and bold words. What's even rarer than that is that although the lad is only at Golden Core Realm, his continuation sentence is not weaker in terms of boldness. The red-headed ghost praised as well. Once the fog fades, the radiance shall illuminate through the entire world. His words can truly devour the mountains and rivers and look down on the rest of the world. If this broken temple of yours is still around many years later, those words are bound to become a legend. The old monk nodded with slight sadness. The both of us are fortunate to be witnesses of this. Suddenly, the red-headed ghost gave an odd chuckle. This is good. The ancient battlefield is about to open up soon. That descendant of Chaos Essence sect that was known to be invincible throughout the Golden Core realm more than 10 years ago is about to meet a match. It's hard to tell. The old monk shook his head. Do you think that Dean left this place without obtaining anything? In addition, he was already the #1 of the phenomenon ranking 100 years ago. Nobody knows how much he has grown since then. The chaos ocean of the human emperor is not to be underestimated. He is a scary person. The old monk had an extremely high evaluation of Dean. The red-headed ghost said, no matter what, the both of them are born in the same era and are bound to be mortal foes. The only other way out is for one to die or submit. That's for the future. We've still got to wait for the ancient battlefield to open up, the old monk said. After a while, the red-headed ghost suddenly laughed in a gloating manner. That lad has been dormant at the bottom of the Dragon Burial Valley for 20 years. Now that he's going to reappear after news of his kin and illness, he must definitely be holding in a belly full of rage. Any dumb fool that provokes him. Hee. The old monk chanted a Buddhist proclamation and said softly, I'm still hoping that everything goes smoothly and that he will return here after severing his mortal ties to reduce his karma of killing. Humph, a tree may wish for stillness but the wind never stops blowing. The red-headed ghost stood up and the chains on his body rattled loudly. He's not going to take the initiative to provoke anybody, but I'm sure 20 years is more than enough to make many things fade into the background. I'm sure many cultivators of the North region have already forgotten about him. The red-headed ghost reared his head in loud laughter. That's for the best. Shiver. Cultivators of the North region. That strongest monster incarnate of history whom you guys had ganged up on and bullied back in the past and was cast into the depths of the Dragon Burial Valley has now returned. Ha ha ha. Chapter 616. 3 Dynasties Allied Army. Chapter 616. 3 Dynasties Allied Army. Dragon Burial Valley. Demoness G had been standing at the edge of the cliff for a long time with furrowed brows. The cold wind had crumpled the hem of her dress and she frowned with troubles. Just as she was about to give up and leave, a figure appeared not far away. It was getting closer and closer. The green robes were ever so familiar. She heaved a sigh of relief. After 20 years, nothing seemed to have changed about Su Zimo apart from a unique aura he had gained that was indescribable. Demoness G's heart skipped a beat and she checked out Su Zimo's dantian with her spirit-peering art. Immediately after, a look of pity flashed through her eyes. Sigh, how can a destroyed dantian recover? I was thinking too much. She sighed internally. Through her detection, Su Zimo's dantian was like a swamp of still water without any spirit energy. In reality, Su Zimo's dantian was indeed different from the past after the tribulation. His golden core was shattered and formed a black hole-like existence. The Soraka flower was hidden right in the black hole. As long as Su Zimo did not use his spirit energy, cultivators wouldn't be able to detect anything and would instead find an empty dantian. If they knew nothing about his past, any outsider would take him as an extremely ordinary mortal. Zimo, how have you been after all these years? It was rare that Demoness G was not joking. Instead, her eyes were pained with a hint of pity and her expression was emotional. This man before her was bedazzling 20 years ago. Even outside of the North region, some cultivators of Tianhuang mainland knew about him. But now, most of the people in the North region had already forgotten about him, let alone those in Tianhuang mainland. Su Zimo replied calmly, I'm fine. I know where Mr. Su is. I'll take you there. Su Hong did not have much time left and it was better if they met sooner. Demoness G knew what was on Su Zimo's mind right now and led the way without hesitating. Su Zimo followed closely behind. The two of them sped and crossed the Great Qian ruins. Arriving at the depths of the palace, Su Zimo paused briefly when he looked at the blood-stained ruins beneath him. 20 years ago, the paragons of the North region had gathered for the birth of the vermilion fruit. Countless paragons were buried there in that battle. A fire had incinerated half the skies. The temperature of the golden lava was extremely high and riddled the ground with holes. The underground palace had already caved in a long time ago and the cave was buried. The mysterious golden volcano was also buried deep underground. No matter what secrets there were inside, nobody would probably find out anymore. After a slight pause, Su Zimo caught up to Dynasties and suddenly asked, "Is Xueqi in danger?" If Xueqi knew about Su Hong's condition, she would definitely be the one to inform him. The only possibility for her not doing so would be if she was in danger and could not get away. Yes. Dynasties nodded. In recent years, the North region has been filled with wars with the rise of multiple vassal states. The other three dynasties are coveting from the sidelines while it's messy within the imperial court of the Great Zhou dynasty with troubles both internal and external. 2 years ago, the Xia, Shang and Yu dynasties joined forces and formed an allied army to infiltrate the borders of Great Zhou, hoping to annihilate Great Zhou entirely and split our land among themselves. Su Zimo asked in a seemingly casual manner, "What are the cultivation realms of those that are fighting in the battles between the dynasties?" The armies are mostly formed by foundation establishment and golden cores. Of course, there are also some nascent souls. Void reversions won't appear on the front lines for now. They will only come forth for a final battle if the allied army reaches the capital. Dynasties replied. "I see," Su Zimo said. Dynasties continued. "My sister led the army to deal with it personally and keep the enemies at bay. She has been outside for almost 2 years now without returning and does not know about Mr. Su's condition at all." Su Zimo frowned. Dynasties added hurriedly, "Don't worry, she's completely fine. Perfected Lord Mingzai has been by her the entire time." Su Zimo remained silent. He had already vaguely guessed through Dynasties' words that Xueqi was in a terrible state. Even if her life was not in danger, she was entangled with troubles. Now that the three dynasties had formed an alliance, it meant that they were bent on getting their hands on the Great Zhou's territories. With the Great Zhou's foundations, even if they had the terrain advantage, it would be difficult for them to defend against the conquest of the allied army. The fact that Xueqi had not returned for 2 years was a clear sign of how bad the situation was. Furthermore, changes happen rapidly on the battlefield and anything could happen. There was no guarantee of Xueqi's safety even if perfected Lord Mingzai was by her side. The two of them traveled day and night without resting. A few days later, they arrived in the capital of Great Zhou. In order to avoid attention and unnecessary trouble, Su Zimo traveled in Dynasties' carriage. Along the way in the palace, they made many twists and turns to head for a secret ground in the palace. Not long after, Dynasties brought Su Zimo to a house and said softly, "I'll stay outside and not enter. Call for me at any time if you require anything." Su Zimo nodded. Standing quietly outside the door, Su Zimo did not dare to open the doors. In fact, he had already extended his palm and made contact with the doors, but he just did not dare to push them. Su Zimo knew that his older brother, Su Hong, was inside. He could already sense the twilight aura emanating from the room. The more it was the case, the more he did not dare to open the doors. "Zimo, is that you?" Suddenly, a voice sounded from within. It was weak and hoarse. Instantly, countless images flashed through Su Zimo's mind. "Zimo, go back and study. You're not allowed to learn martial arts. This horse is called Zhui Feng and it's slightly sentient. Since it has affinity with you, it's yours from today onwards. Zimo, as long as you can pass the college examination, I'll reward you with a mansion." This voice was no longer as robust and firm as in the past. However, it awakened countless memories in Su Zimo. Instantly, he felt his nose stuff up as he pushed the doors and entered. "Brother, it's me." Although he was already mentally prepared, Su Zimo's heart skipped a beat when he caught sight of Su Hong. His brother had grown old. Age was like a merciless blade that sliced and left scars on Su Hong's face. If he had not seen it himself, It would have been difficult for Su Zimo to imagine this frail old person before him wielding an iron spear to lead heavy armored troops through the battlefield and dominate the world. How awesome was he back then? Dozens of years had passed. In his 60s, Su Hong looked like someone in his hundreds. He was filled with white hair and had a pair of hazy eyes. However, the way he looked at Su Zimo was still as comforting and benevolent as ever. Su Zimo strode quickly forward and knelt before Su Hong, holding the latter's wrists gently. Su Zimo's hands trembled. He could clearly feel Su Hong's life diminishing bit by bit from his body. His organs had already begun to deteriorate. At the end of his lifespan, Su Hong did not have much time left, and even deities won't be able to save him at this point. "I'm late." Su Zimo slumped his head and said with a quivering tone. "It's not late, it's not." Su Hong patted Su Zimo gently on the palm and consoled the latter. "I don't have any regrets now that I'm able to see you fine and well before my passing." "Heis." Immediately after, Su Hong sighed. "It's just a pity I can't get to see Xiaoning in the end. I wonder how that lass is. I wonder if she suffered outside. You know that she has a weak personality. What is she going to do if she gets bullied without us around?" Chapter 617. I Am Su Zimo. Chapter 617. I Am Su Zimo. Su Zimo said, "Xiaoning joined a major sect in order to refine an elixir that can increase one's lifespan. She won't suffer. She even said that you'll be the first one to take the elixir once she succeeds in refining it." "That lass." Su Hong smiled. Su Zimo's heart clenched at the sight of Su Hong's smile. There was still slightly more than a month to go before the opening of the ancient battlefield. He knew very well that given his brother's current condition, there was no way the latter could hold out until then. This meant that Su Hong would never ever be able to meet Xiaoning again. A moment later, Su Hong patted the back of Su Zimo's palm and said softly, "Send me back." Su Zimo understood where Su Hong meant by back. It was most likely something that Su Hong was thinking about incessantly for the past 20 years. A fox dies in its hole and a leaf lands at its roots. More than longing, Su Hong felt a deep guilt towards that piece of land and its inhabitants. He had to return. "All right." Su Zimo nodded and carried Su Hong in his arms before walking to the entrance. Demoness Ji was waiting not far away and she hurried over, asking softly, "Where are you headed for?" Su Zimo replied, "Let's leave the capital first." There were many people in the capital of Great Zhou, and it would be easy for him to be exposed carrying Su Hong with him. If anyone discovered Su Hong's presence in the capital of Great Zhou, the Great Zhou dynasty would be annihilated even before the allied army of the three dynasties struck. Su Zimo supported Su Hong into Demoness Ji's carriage. The carriage was adorned with jewels and jade majestically and glowed with a bright spirit light. It rose slowly into the air and headed out of the capital. The journey within the capital was mostly smooth when people saw that it was a carriage of the princess. Before long, the three of them had already left the capital. Su Zimo checked his surroundings and upon seeing that nobody was around, he said, "Thank you for your help, Demoness Ji. I'll take my brother away from here. You can head on back." "I don't have anything on. I'll send you guys wherever you want to go," Demoness Ji said hurriedly. Just as Su Zimo was about to decline, he frowned and his ears twitched. "Someone's approaching." Su Zimo's expression turned cold. The person chased after them at an extremely fast speed. It was clear that the intruder was not friendly. Soon, the sound of clothes fluttering could be heard in the air. 10 figures descended and surrounded Demoness Ji's carriage. The leader was a bald man clad in armor. His eyes were sharp as a vulture's. This was the commander of the Great Zhou Dynasty's Scarlet Vulture Guards, Bald Vulture. The other 9 wore scarlet robes with sect badges on their waists. They had mighty auras and did not look friendly. All 9 of them were golden cores of true fire sect. Demoness Ji pushed down Su Zimo's arm and shook her head, gesturing for him to calm down and not be reckless. If he was exposed, he would definitely attract an endless pursuit. The entire north region would be shaken. Su Zimo was expressionless and did not move. Through the curtain, Demoness Ji asked with a deep voice, "Bald Vulture, don't you know who I am? The guts of you to try and halt my carriage." Hee hee. Bald Vulture chuckled. Where are you heading to, little princess? It's none of your business. Get lost. Demoness G's voice was laced with anger as she hollered. Humph. Bald Vulture retraced his smile and said darkly, little princess, I'm sure you're trying to pass a message to your sister after hearing some news, right? What are you talking about? Demoness G frowned. She did not understand what Bald Vulture meant by that. When he heard that, Su Zimo already realized that Ji Yaoxue was in a worse state than he had imagined. The fact that the capital guards dared to obstruct a carriage of the Princess of Great Zhou was a clear sign of how messy things had become in the Great Zhou dynasty. Furthermore, it was clear that Bald Vulture was implying something from his words. Bald Vulture sneered, little princess, you don't have to act dumb in front of me. Even if you know nothing, please return to the capital. Demoness G's killing intent rose. She was no kind soul. Her alter ego was the pure maiden of the fiend sects. Right then, Demoness G suddenly felt her vision blur. Su Zimo had already left the carriage. Bald Vulture, do you remember me? An indifferent voice sounded outside the carriage. Bald Vulture gazed at the green-robed cultivator and was momentarily stunned. Immediately after, his eyes widened and his pupils constricted as he yelped, It's you! How are you not dead? Bald Vulture was flustered at the sight of Su Zimo. A man's name grows like the shadow of a tree. Su Zimo was notorious throughout the North region after that battle in the Great Qian ruins. It was nothing if he had died just like that. However, no golden core of the North region would be able to compose themselves at the sight of Su Zimo alive before them. Who is that person? The true fire sect cultivators at the side used their spirit-peering art and noticed that the green-robed cultivator's dantian was empty. Upon realizing that he was only a mortal, their eyes filled with contempt. He is. I am Su Zimo. There was a momentary silence. The cultivators of True Fire Sect exchanged glances and burst into laughter. Everyone knows that Su Zimo died at the bottom of the Dragon Burial Valley. You're saying that you're Su Zimo? Ha ha ha. Interesting. He's trying to impersonate a dead man. Everyone from True Fire Sect laughed. However, Bald Vulture wanted to cry as his body turned stiff while cold sweat poured down. He had noticed something. The moment the green-robed cultivator declared that he was Su Zimo, it meant that all of them were going to die. Is it funny? For a cultivator of True Fire Sect, before his laughter stopped, his vision blurred and a cold voice rang in his ears. So fast. That was the last thought that crossed the person's mind. The next moment, right in front of everyone, Su Zimo reached out and tapped the person on the throat gently with his finger. Crack, crack, crack. His throat snapped and a golden core died on the spot. Audacious! Bastard, how dare you! The other golden cores of True Fire Sect were enraged and hollered. Clang, clang. 8 golden cores summoned their flying swords one after another. The swords quivered and shone with bright spirit lights. 8 of them rapidly formed an encirclement with Su Zimo in the center, summoning their flying swords with one hand while conjuring hand seals with the other to release True Fire Sect's spirit arts. The attacks surged forth instantly. Su Zimo's expression did not change as he opened his mouth. Om! He chanted in Sanskrit. It was the first of 6 words of Daming mantra. Instantly, it reverberated endlessly like thunder. The void was filled with a shuddering power. The flying swords that were aimed for Su Zimo froze in midair. The spirit arts of the 8 perfected beings from True Fire Sect dissipated in midair before they could even form. All 8 of them stood stiffly on the spot with bulged eyeballs that were bloodshot. Bald Vulture could see it clearly. Blood was already oozing from the ears, eyes, nose and mouth of the 8 people. They were bleeding from all orifices. Ma! Su Zimo spoke once more. The second Sanskrit had arrived. Bang, 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 bang. Right in front of Bald Vulture, the bodies of the 8 perfected beings from True Fire Sect exploded into blood mists without any corpse remaining. Demoness G was about to exit the carriage when she saw that. 8 golden cores exploded to death just from the shock of 2 syllables from Su Zimo. Suddenly, Demoness G realized. After 20 years, instead of diminishing, Su Zimo's combat strength had grown to a frightening level that even she could not read any longer. Chapter 618. I will establish Tao. Chapter 618. I will establish Tao. Turning around, Su Zimo looked at Bald Vulture, who was not far away, and said indifferently, "Go on, tell us everything you know." I don't know what you're talking about, fellow Taoist." Bald Vulture chuckled dryly. "Die if you refuse to speak." Su Zimo closed in step by step towards Bald Vulture in midair. Although he was neither fast nor slow, there was a tremendous pressure that surged forward instantaneously. That was a true suppression. In fact, Bald Vulture felt like he was choking. His arms trembled slightly and a look of fear flashed through his eyes before turning into madness. With a menacing expression, Bald Vulture snarled, "I can tell you everything, but you must promise to let me live. You're not qualified to talk about terms with me." Su Zimo had an ice-cold expression as he arrived before Bald Vulture. He gripped the latter's throat, and just as he was about to exert strength, a fragrance wafted over. "Leave it to me, Zimo." Demoness G's silky smooth hand touched Su Zimo's wrist. Su Zimo relented his grip with it. Arriving before Bald Vulture, Demoness G smiled charmingly with a ripple in her eyes as she asked gently, "Why did you stand in my way, great commander?" Bald Vulture was completely stupefied and had a lost gaze, as though he had lost his soul. The second and fourth princes are prepared to write a letter together to get rid of the third princess and recommend the first prince to ascend the throne. The first prince is the eldest and should inherit the throne in theory. The third princess is unjustified to take the throne, and furthermore, she's a woman. What's wrong with her being a woman? Demoness G raised her brow and asked coldly, "Can't women ascend the throne? My sister is out there fighting against our enemies, and yet, you despicable scum are scheming in the dark here. I think all of you are looking to die." Before she finished her sentence, Demoness G had already grazed her finger gently across Bald Vulture's throat. A thin red line appeared. Bald Vulture's eyes widened and he gradually woke from his stupor. He clutched his throat with both arms and his legs flailed, but he could not stop the fresh blood from spewing. Splash! Splash! Finally, Bald Vulture's gaze dimmed and he fell, dead on the spot. "I need you to come forth for the affairs of the capital," Su Zimo said darkly. "Given your identity and means, you'll be able to suppress this matter." "Yes, don't worry," Demoness G nodded. Su Zimo returned to the carriage and helped Su Hong out before nodding towards Demoness G. "I'll be leaving now." Before his words were finished, Su Zimo had already sped into the distance at an extremely terrifying speed. In the blink of an eye, he was already at the horizon. "Where are you going?" Demoness G yelled from behind. There was no reply for a long time. Although Demoness G wanted to chase after him, she knew that at this moment, the capital of Great Zhou needed her more. A gigantic bird flew above the skies of Yen country. The bird was lined with scales and burned with a thin flame on its body. Its eyes were sharp as it surveyed its surroundings with wings that were hundreds of feet wide spread apart. It was an ancient remnant beast, the purple flame bird. The most shocking thing was that the purple flame bird seemed like it was pulling an ordinary-looking carriage. Side by side, two people sat within the carriage. One was a refined scholar and the other was a frail old man filled with white hair. The two of them were Su Zimo and Su Hong, who were rushing back to Yen country. Su Zimo captured an ancient remnant beast along the way and used it to pull the carriage temporarily, saving them quite a bit of trouble. The two of them crossed the 13 cities of Yen country that were massacred by Glass Palace. Even until now, the corpses left behind back then could be seen piled into mountains. The bloodstains on the walls had already turned black after enduring the weather over the years. With every city they passed, Su Hong would stop to kneel in front of the cities, paying his respect to the withered corpses. The final city. This was the capital of Yen country in the past. After 20 years, the glamour of the past had long disappeared. All their acquaintances of the past had already grown old as well. Uncle Zhang, Lu Yu, Yu Qihua, Song Qi and even the black-armored cavalry of the past were buried under the ruins. They had returned to the earth. "I should have been here with you guys 20 years ago. My brothers, I have returned." As he stood on that familiar piece of land, Su Hong's tears streamed down his face as he could not overcome his sadness. Su Zimo seemed to be able to visualize the scene of the massacre that happened when Glass Palace descended. Against cultivators, mortals were helpless and their lives were as cheap as blades of grass. Lowering his head, Su Zimo had a stoned expression. During the past few days of their travels, he had witnessed way too many corpses along the way. Massacre, violence, hunger, destitute, rape, snatching, killing, cannibalism. Every single bit of structure was destroyed. Human life was even cheaper than that of ants. The sight before him was no different from what hell was described as in Buddhism. As the flames of wars raged, the most helpless and pathetic ones were the mortals of the world who had no spirit roots and could not cultivate. Through those mortals, Su Zimo caught glimpses of himself. He was originally one of the most ordinary people. If not for Dai Yu, he might have been one of the corpses they had encountered along the way. If Su Zimo had intervened, he might have been able to save 1, 2 or even 100 people, but he wouldn't have been able to save everybody. In fact, he could not even save his own kin. He could only watch as Su Hong approached the end of his lifespan. Along the way, Su Zimo had been contemplating a single question. Even if he was able to come out 10 years ago, what difference would it have made? Would he have been able to save Su Hong? After all, Su Hong was a mortal whose lifespan would be exhausted 20, 30 or even 40 years later. The two of them were going to have to face an eternal farewell no matter what. Even if he had not offended Glass Palace, would the masses have escaped from a calamity as such? The mortals were still the first to suffer from the flames of war. Against cultivators, mortals had no control over their own fates. Cultivators could trample on the dignity of mortals as they pleased. No matter how the mortals struggled, nothing would change. If not for Dai Yu, Su Zimo might have been killed by Zhou Dingyun when he returned from cultivation in the past. He was a fortunate person. Dai Yu had altered his fate for him. However, who could change Su Hong's fate? Who could change the fate of all the living beings in the world? Were mortals that had no spirit roots and were unable to cultivate condemned to be sacrifices of war? Were they meant to be the food of demon beasts and corpses to be trampled on by cultivators? Su Zimo was not a saint. He had never thought of bringing salvation for the living beings of the world single-handedly. He merely wanted to help his kin survive. All he wanted, or perhaps all mortals in the world, should have a chance of fighting against their fates. I want to establish the Tao. All of a sudden, Su Zimo raised his head and gripped his fists. An unprecedented light shone in his eyes as he said slowly with an unyielding and resolute tone, I want to break free the shackles of fate that bind every single living being in the world. So what if one has no spirit root? I'm going to change the fate of all living beings. I'm going to allow all lives in this world the ability to cultivate and become immortals. His voice reverberated through the heavens and echoed with a deafening vibration. Boom! Right after he spoke, the initially clear skies boomed with thunder. A shuddering aura blanketed downwards with an unstoppable divine might, as though he had offended the deities above. At the same time, all the patriarchs that were in seclusion in various secret grounds across Tianhuang mainland jolted awake, looking at the firmaments with shock on their faces. Enigma Palace. An old man wearing a Confucian crown sensed something and divined with his fingers. He was startled and remarked, Someone has just laid down a great vow that has shocked even the firmaments. You're tuning in to the Xueqi's Martial Arts Saga YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.